At the masquerade, I could not take my eyes off the woman in the silver mask. She was witty, and she was warm, and she was so alive that being near her felt like standing next to an open window after years in a sealed room. And she was, in every single way, the exact opposite of my ice-cold wife, the one who had thrown a stack of divorce papers across the breakfast table that very morning and told me she wanted her freedom. And somewhere near midnight, half drunk on champagne and on the strange freedom of a face no one could see, I looked at this glorious stranger and I said the truest thing I had said out loud in 3 years. "You know," I told her, "for the first time in longer than I can remember, I actually want to be alive." She went very still. And then the great clock began to strike midnight, 12 slow, deep tolls, and all across the ballroom people laughed and reached up and pulled off their masks, and I reached for the silver mask on the face of the woman who had just made me want to live again, and I lifted it, and I froze. Because underneath the silver mask was my wife, Vivienne. And down her cheek, catching the light of 10,000 candles, ran a single tear. I need to stop the story right there for a moment, at the frozen instant, with my hand still holding her mask and my heart falling out of my body, because everything, all of it, the whole tangled ruin of the last 3 years, was contained in that 1 second, and I did not understand any of it yet. And by the time you finish this, you will understand all of it, and you will hate the person who did this to us as much as I do, and you will, I hope, cry a little at the end, the way I did, because this is not really a story about a masquerade. It is a story about 2 people who loved each other for years and were made to believe they were hated, and about the one night a silver mask let them finally, accidentally, see the truth, and about the war we had to fight to keep it. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me back up. Let me tell you who we were, before the mask, so you understand exactly how impossible that frozen second was, and exactly how far we had both fallen from each other, and exactly who pushed us. My name is Julian Thorne. I am 32 years old, and I am the heir and now the head of Thorne Group, which, if you don't follow these things, is one of the 2 great commercial dynasties of this city. Old money, older pride, a sprawling empire of shipping and property and finance built by my grandfather and expanded by my father and dropped 3 years ago when my father's heart gave out squarely onto my unprepared shoulders. And 3 years ago, in the same season that I inherited an empire, I also acquired a wife, because those 2 things were, it turned out, the same transaction. Her name is Vivienne. Vivienne Dubois, she was then. The only daughter of the Dubois family, which is the other great dynasty of this city, our ancient rivals and, in the strange way of these things, our natural counterweights, the second of the 2 thrones. And when my father was dying, and the Thorne Empire was vulnerable, and the Dubois Empire was circling the way rivals circle a wounded thing, the 2 old families did what old families have done for 1,000 years. They made a marriage. They merged the 2 thrones into one, Thorne and Dubois, an alliance sealed in a cathedral in front of 900 guests, to create a single dynasty too large for anyone to threaten, and the 2 chess pieces they moved together to seal it were me and Vivienne, who had met exactly 4 times before we stood at the altar, and who were, on our wedding day, near strangers. I want to be honest with you about that wedding because it matters. I did not marry Vivienne for love. That would be a lie, and this whole story is about the cost of lies, so I will not start with one. I married Vivienne because my dying father asked me to, because the empire needed it, because it was my duty, and because, God help me, in those 4 brief meetings before the wedding, I had caught something in her, some flicker, that made the duty feel less like a sentence and more like a door. She was beautiful, yes, but the city is full of beautiful women, and I had never much cared. It was something else. In the second of our 4 meetings, at some dreadful formal dinner, our 2 families performing the merger over the crystal, I had watched Vivienne Dubois, cool and composed and untouchable, quietly, under the table, slip her dessert to a terrified serving boy who had dropped a tray and was about to be humiliated, and she had done it without a flicker crossing her perfect face, so that no one saw, so that the boy would not be shamed by being seen to need rescuing. No one saw but me, because I am the kind of person who watches, and I had thought, in that moment, oh, there's a whole person in there. There's a warm and secret person hiding behind all that ice, and no one is ever going to be allowed to see her, and I would give a great deal to be the one who gets to. That was the flicker. That was the door. On my wedding day, marrying a near stranger for duty and empire, I carried one small, foolish hope in my chest, which was that behind the ice of Vivienne Dubois, there was a warm and secret person, and that a marriage, even one built for the wrong reasons, might be the thing that finally let me in to meet her. And here's the tragedy, the whole tragedy, the thing that I did not learn until the night of the silver mask. Vivienne married me carrying the exact same hope. She told me, later, everything, on the long night after the ball, and I will tell you now what she told me, because you need to carry it through the whole story the way I now carry it. Vivienne Dubois did not want to marry me either, for love or for anything. She married me because her family needed it, because it was her duty, because the Dubois empire required the merger as much as the Thorne empire did. But in those same 4 meetings, she had caught her own flicker of me. In the 3rd meeting, apparently, at another dreadful function, she had watched me, when I thought no one was looking, spend 20 minutes in a corner with my father's oldest and now senile business partner, a man everyone else in the room avoided because he no longer made sense, and she had watched me listen to his rambling, repeated stories with total patience and real warmth, laughing at the right places, treating a confused old man like the titan he had once been, giving him back for 20 minutes his dignity, because I could not stand to see him left alone in a corner. No one saw but her, because she is also the kind of person who watches. And she had thought, apparently, the exact thought I had thought about her. Oh, there's a whole person in there. There's a warm and secret person hiding behind all that cold thorn reserve, and I would give a great deal to be the one who gets to meet him. Do you see it? Do you see the horror and the beauty of it? 2 people, married for duty, near strangers, each secretly, quietly, carrying into that marriage the exact same foolish hope, that behind the other's mask of ice was a warm and secret person worth loving. And each of us right, each of us completely and totally right, because behind my reserve was a man aching to be seen, and behind her ice was a woman aching to be seen. And we were married, we lived in the same house, we shared the same name, and we had every reason and every opportunity in the world to simply, gently, over time, take off the masks and meet. And instead, over 3 years, we froze into perfect ice, each of us more certain every single day that the other was exactly the cold, dutiful, loveless creature we had feared. Until this morning, when the woman I had married, carrying a secret hope, threw divorce papers across the table and asked me to set her free. How? How does that happen? How do 2 warm people, each secretly, longing for the other, married and living together for 3 years, end up as 2 blocks of ice signing divorce papers, each convinced the other never felt a thing? That is the question. And the answer? The answer I did not have that morning and had by the end of that terrible, miraculous night is the whole story, and the answer has a name, and the name belongs to a person who spent 3 years, patiently, invisibly, brilliantly, making absolutely certain that Julian and Vivienne Thorne would never once take off their masks and see each other, because that person had everything to gain from our ice and everything to lose from our thaw. But I didn't know that yet. On the morning of the masquerade, I knew only that my marriage was a frozen ruin, that my wife despised me, that I had spent 3 years living beside a beautiful woman who could not stand the sight of me, and that this morning she had finally said out loud the thing I had believed she felt for years, which was that she wanted to be free of me. Let me tell you about that morning, because it is where the story truly begins. I came down to breakfast the way I came down to breakfast every day, which is to say, braced. Our house, the great Thorne mansion where we had lived as strangers for 3 years, had a particular silence in the mornings, the silence of 2 people performing a marriage for the staff and the world, sitting at the same long table with the whole cold length of it between us, saying good morning in voices like the closing of doors. I had learned over 3 years to armor myself before I came down, to put on the reserve, the ice, the Thorne mask, because every morning I came down still carrying that foolish first hope, and every morning Vivienne's cold, beautiful face killed it a little more. And a man can only be quietly heartbroken over the same breakfast so many times before he learns to freeze his own face first, so that the killing has nothing left to kill. That is the thing about the masks, the thing I understand now and did not understand then. I froze my face to protect myself from her coldness, and she, I would learn, froze her face to protect herself from mine. And each of us, seeing the other's frozen face, took it as final proof of the coldness we feared, and froze a little harder, to protect ourselves from the proof, which made the other freeze harder still, a spiral, a death spiral, 3 years long, 2 warm people freezing each other solid out of pure mutual self-defense, each of us reading the other's armor as the truth, and never once guessing it was armor, because we could not see our own. So I came down braced, and Vivienne was already there, at the far end of the table, cold and perfect and beautiful in the morning light, and she did not look up. And I said good morning in my closed-door voice, and she said good morning in hers. And I sat, and the staff poured the coffee, and it was exactly like 3 years of mornings. Until it wasn't. Because when the staff withdrew, Vivienne set down her cup and slid a thick envelope down the whole cold length of the table and said, in a voice with something underneath it that I was too armored to hear, "I've had the papers drawn up, Julian. I think we've both suffered this long enough. I'm asking you for a divorce." And I looked at the envelope, and I looked at my wife's cold, composed, unreadable face, and I felt the last of that 3-year-old foolish hope finally completely die. And I did the thing I had trained myself to do, which was to armor my own face so that she would not see it die. And I said, in my closed-door voice, "Of course, if that's what you want, I'll have my lawyers review it." And here is the thing that haunts me, the thing I only understood on the night of the mask. When I said, "if that's what you want," in my flat, armored voice, I meant it as surrender, as heartbreak, as a man agreeing to let go of the woman he had never been allowed to have. And Vivienne heard it as ice, as indifference, as the final proof that Julian Thorne did not care, had never cared, would sign the papers without a second thought because his cold heart had never held a thing for her. She heard my heartbreak as coldness, because that is what 3 years had taught her to hear. And she nodded, her own face armored against her own breaking heart, and she said, "Thank you. I think it's for the best." And she stood, and she left. And I sat alone at the long, cold table with the divorce papers in front of me. And neither of us had seen, neither of us ever saw, that we were two people whose hearts were breaking for the exact same reason, in the exact same room, at the exact same moment, each convinced we were breaking alone. We were both, that morning, supposed to attend the Dubois masquerade that night. It was the great annual event of Vivienne's family, the Dubois masquerade ball, the social pinnacle of the city's year, 600 masked guests in the Dubois' ancestral ballroom, and Vivienne and I were expected, as we were expected at all such things, to appear together, the perfect frozen couple, the merged dynasty, and to perform our marriage for the city one more time. Neither of us wanted to go. Both of us had to. And so, that night, having agreed to divorce over breakfast, Julian and Vivienne Thorne put on their formal clothes and their masks, separately, in separate wings of a house neither of us had ever felt at home in, and we went, separately, to a masquerade, each of us armored, each of us heartbroken, each of us certain the other did not care, to spend one last public evening performing a marriage that had just ended. And a mask, it turns out, is a very dangerous thing to give to two people who have spent 3 years frozen behind masks of their own. Because when you cannot see a person's face, you cannot read their armor. And when you cannot read their armor, you cannot be wounded by it. And when you cannot be wounded by it, you do not need armor of your own. A mask, the silly decorative kind, the silver and gold and feathered kind, does the one thing that 3 years of marriage could not do for Vivienne and me. It made us safe. It made us anonymous. It took away, for one night, all the accumulated evidence, all the frozen mornings, all the closed-door voices, all the certainty each of us carried about who the other was, and it left, underneath, just two people who could not see each other's faces, and therefore could not see each other's ice, and who were, when you stripped away everything the 3 years had built, exactly what we had always secretly been. Warm, alive, and aching, so terribly aching, to be seen. I did not know the woman in the silver mask was my wife. That is the thing you have to believe, and it is the thing that everyone who hears this story struggles to believe, and it is completely true. I had lived beside Vivienne for 3 years, and I did not recognize her, and I want to explain how that is possible, because it is the emotional center of everything. I did not recognize her because I had never seen her. Not really. Not once in 3 years. I had seen the mask. I had seen the ice, the armor, the cold, perfect, composed face she wore at every breakfast and every function and every frozen moment of our marriage. I had memorized that face the way you memorize a wall you keep walking into. But the woman behind it, the warm, secret, alive person I had glimpsed for 1 second slipping dessert to a serving boy before the wedding, that woman I had not seen in 3 years, because that woman had gone into hiding behind the ice on approximately our 3rd week of marriage and had never once, in 3 years, dared to come out, because every time she had peeked out, she had met my armored face and fled back inside. And at the masquerade, behind a silver mask, in a room where no one could see her ice because no one called her face, that woman came out. For the first time in 3 years, Vivienne Thorne took off her armor, because the mask made it safe, because the man flirting with her could not see her, could not judge her, could not be the cold husband who killed her hope every morning, was just a stranger in a golden mask who seemed impossibly delighted by her. And so she let herself be, for one night, the warm, alive, witty, secret person she actually was. And I met her, the real her, for the very first time, in the 3rd year of our marriage, at her family's ball. And I fell for her so fast and so hard that it frightened me. And I never once suspected, because the woman I was falling for was warm and alive and delighted to be near me. And the woman I was married to was, I was utterly certain, none of those things. Do you understand now? Do you understand the frozen second? My hand on her mask, the tear on her cheek? I had just spent an entire evening falling in love, truly, helplessly, for the first time in my adult life, with a woman who made me want to be alive. And I had just told her so, and I had lifted her mask expecting a stranger, a miracle, the beginning of something, and found instead my own wife, the woman I was divorcing, the woman I was certain despised me, and in the same instant, I understood 2 impossible things at once. That the warm, alive miracle I had fallen for tonight was Vivienne, and that Vivienne, my cold wife, was the warm, alive miracle, had always been, the whole time, and I had never once seen her. And the tear on her cheek, because Vivienne, behind that silver mask, had just spent an entire evening being seen, truly seen, for the first time in 3 years, by her own husband, and had let herself hope, wildly, secretly, that this delighted stranger might be the beginning of a whole new life, a life where someone looked at her the way this man was looking at her. And then he had told her that she made him want to live, this stranger, and her heart had soared, and the clock had struck, and she had watched his hand reach for her mask, and she had known, a half-second before I did, what he was about to discover. That the stranger who made him want to live was the wife he was divorcing, and that she had just watched her own husband fall in love with her while both of them were signing the papers to end their marriage, and that everything, all 3 frozen years, had been a catastrophe of the most unbearable kind, the kind where the thing you wanted most was in front of you the whole time, and you both froze it to death out of fear. That is what the tear was. That is what was in that 1 second, my hand on the mask, her tear catching the candlelight. 3 years of 2 people loving each other and believing they were hated, collapsing all at once into a single, unbearable understanding. We stood there, the 2 of us, frozen, in the middle of 600 unmasking guests, and the great clock finished striking 12, and neither of us could move or speak. And I want to tell you what happened next, what we said, what we did in that ballroom, and in the long, shattering night that followed, when 2 people who had just discovered they had loved each other all along also had to reckon with the fact that they were, as of that morning, getting divorced, and that neither of us understood, yet, how it had happened. How 2 warm people had been so completely turned to ice, or that there was a reason, a person, a decade-long design behind it, waiting to be uncovered. But first you have to sit in the frozen second with me a little longer, because I have not yet told you the most important thing, the thing that turned a tragedy into a war. Somewhere in that ballroom, watching my hand lift the silver mask from Vivienne's face, watching the 2 of us freeze in mutual devastation, watching 3 years of careful work threaten to come undone in a single, unplanned instant, one other person was standing very, very still. And that person was not crying. That person was calculating. For a moment, neither of us moved. The ballroom churned around us, 600 unmasked faces laughing and drinking and reaching for the next glass, and Vivienne and I stood in the center of it, an island of frozen devastation that no one else could see, because to everyone else, we were just a married couple standing together, the Coles, the perfect frozen alliance, exactly where we were supposed to be. Vivienne recovered first. Of course she did. She had 3 years more practice at armoring a breaking heart than I had, because she had been doing it every single morning while I only did it back. I watched the ice come back down over her face, watched her wipe the single tear away with a gloved hand as though it were a smudge of powder, watched her become, in the space of 2 breaths, the cold, composed Vivienne Thorne I had lived beside for 3 years. But I had seen the tear, and I had spent the whole night with the woman underneath, and I could not unsee her now. And so when the ice came down, for the first time in 3 years, I did not believe it. I looked at my wife's cold, perfect face, and for the first time I knew, all the way down, that it was a mask, because I had just spent 4 hours with the person behind it. "Don't," I said. It came out before I could stop it, low and rough, and Vivienne's composure flickered. "Don't what?" she said, and her voice was ice, but her eyes Her eyes were not. "Don't put it back on," I said. The, the face. I've seen you now. I spent the whole night with you, the real you, and Vivienne, I have to talk to you. I have to talk to you tonight, right now, because I don't understand. I don't understand anything. And if we go home and put the ice back up and go to separate wings and sign the papers on Monday, I am going to spend the rest of my life not understanding. And I can't do that, please. I have never in my life said please like that. I heard myself say it and I did not recognize my own voice, because it was not the closed-door voice. It was the voice from behind the mask, the alive voice, the one she had unlocked. And I watched Vivienne hear it, and I watched something in her armor crack, just slightly, just enough. "People are watching," she said, but her voice had changed. "Let them," I said. "Let them watch. Let the whole city watch. Vivienne, an hour ago I told a woman in a silver mask that she made me want to be alive for the first time in years, and I meant it. It was the truest thing I've said in 3 years, and the woman was you. It was you. Do you understand what that means? It means I've spent 3 years married to the one person on earth who could make me feel like that, and I never once knew. And neither did you. And something is wrong, Vivienne. Something has been wrong for 3 years, and I need to know what it is. Tonight, before the ice comes back and I lose you again, because I have only just met you and I am not ready to lose you already." And Vivienne Thorne, my cold wife, looked at me across 2 feet of ballroom that felt like the whole distance of 3 frozen years, and I watched her make a decision that I will be grateful for until the day I die, which was to let the mask stay off for 1 more hour, to risk it, to trust the alive voice over the 3 years of ice. And she said, very quietly, in a voice that was not the closed-door voice at all, "There's a garden, off the East Terrace, my grandmother's garden. No one goes there during the ball." She swallowed. "I used to go there when I was a girl, when I needed to be somewhere no one could see me. If we're going to do this, Julian, if we're going to actually talk, for the first time in 3 years, I don't want to do it here, in front of them, wearing this." She touched her own cheek where the ice was. "I want to do it there, where I can take it off." We slipped out of the ballroom separately, because even then, even shattered, we were the products of 3 years of performance and did not know how to stop. And I found the East Terrace, and I found the small, dark gate at the end of it, and beyond it, hidden behind a high hedge, was a garden, small and overgrown and lit only by the moon and the distant golden glow of the ballroom windows. An old woman's private garden that the world had forgotten, and Vivienne was already there, standing among the roses, and she had taken off her gloves, and when she turned to me, the ice was gone from her face, all of it, and there she was, the woman from behind the silver mask, my wife, and I understood that I was seeing her, really seeing her, for only the second time in my life, and that the first time had been an hour ago, and that I had somehow married her in between. "I don't know how to do this," she said, and her voice broke on it. "I don't know how to just talk to you, without all of it. I haven't known how to talk to you in 3 years, Julian. I forgot how somewhere in the first month, and I never found it again." "Then let's find it now," I said. "Together, because I forgot how too. And I think, Vivienne, I think we forgot how at the same time, for the same reason, and I don't know what the reason is, but I need to find out. So let's just start with the truest thing, and go from there. I'll go first." I took a breath, and I said the thing I had carried for 3 years and never once said. "Before we married, at that dinner, the second one, I watched you slip your dessert to a serving boy who dropped a tray so he wouldn't be humiliated, and no one saw but me, and I thought, there is a warm and secret person hiding inside all that ice, and I would give anything to be the one she lets in. That's why I agreed to marry you. Not for the empire, not for duty, for that. For the hope that a marriage might be the thing that let me meet the woman who slipped the dessert. That's the truest thing I have. Your turn." Vivienne stared at me, and then her face crumpled, completely, the last of the ice shattering, and she pressed her gloved hand to her mouth, and she said, through the first real tears I had ever seen her cry, "At the third dinner, I watched you spend 20 minutes in a corner with old Mr. Caldwell, your father's senile partner, when everyone else avoided him, and you listened to his stories like he was still the great man he used to be, and you gave him back his dignity, and no one saw but me, and I thought the exact same thing, Julian. I thought, there is a warm and secret person inside all that Thorne reserve, and I would give anything to be the one he lets in. That's why I agreed to marry you. For that. For the man in the corner with the old man." She was weeping now, openly. 3 years of it. "We had the same hope. We walked into the same marriage carrying the exact same hope about each other, and we were both right. We were both completely right. And we spent 3 years. We spent 3 years. She couldn't finish. She didn't have to. Because I was there too, in that same collapsing understanding. And I crossed the garden, and I did the thing I'd wanted to do for 3 years and never once been allowed. I took my wife in my arms, and she let me. And we stood among her grandmother's roses in the moonlight, and we wept, both of us, for the 3 years we had lost, for the two people we had frozen to death, for the unbearable, impossible cruelty of having loved each other the whole time and believed we were hated. And when the weeping eased, when we could speak again, we did the thing we should have done 3 years before. We started, finally, to compare notes. And that is when the first cold thread of the real story began to surface. Because as we talked, as we each described the 3 years from the inside, something did not add up. And both of us, being the kind of people who watch, who notice, began, slowly, to feel it. When did it start? I asked her. The freezing, for you. When did you stop? When did you decide I was cold? Vivienne thought about it, wiping her face. The third week, she said slowly. I remember it exactly because I'd been so hopeful those first weeks. I kept trying, in small ways, to reach you. And in the third week, I was told, that you'd said something. About me. To Serena. Everything in me went very still. What did I say? I asked. To Serena, about you. That you'd married me for the merger, Vivienne said, and her voice was careful now, watching my face. And that you found me cold and exhausting, and that you regretted it, and that you wished you'd never agreed to it, and that you intended to do your duty and produce an heir, and otherwise live entirely separate lives, because there was nothing behind my ice worth the effort of thawing. She was watching me very closely now. Serena told me, kindly. She said she thought I deserved to know the truth, so I wouldn't keep humiliating myself trying to reach a man who felt that way. She said she was so sorry, that she'd hoped you'd feel differently, but that you'd been very clear, and that she was only telling me because she cared about me and couldn't bear to watch me keep hoping. Vivienne's face had gone pale. Julian, did you say that? And the garden seemed to tilt around me, because I was suddenly, coldly, remembering my own third week of marriage, and I said, very quietly, no, I never said that. I never said a word of that to anyone. In the third week of our marriage, Vivienne, I would have said the opposite. I was still hoping. I was still trying. I felt the ground shifting under 3 years of certainty. But in the third week of our marriage, someone told me something too. Serena told me. She said she'd been talking with you, woman to woman, and that you'd confided in her, and that you found me dull and beneath you, that the Beaumonts had only agreed to the merger to absorb the Coles, that you regretted the marriage, that you found me cold and boring, and that you intended to do your duty and produce an heir, and otherwise live entirely separate lives, because there was nothing behind my reserve worth the effort of knowing. My voice was shaking now. Serena told me, kindly. She said she thought I deserved to know the truth, so I wouldn't keep humiliating myself trying to reach a woman who felt that way. She said she was so sorry, that she'd hoped you'd feel differently, but that you'd been very clear. We stared at each other in the moonlight. She told us the same lie, Vivienne whispered. The exact same lie, in the same week, each about the other. She told me you were cold, I said, in the exact week that would kill my hope. And she told you I was cold, in the exact week that would kill yours. So that we'd both stop reaching, so that we'd both put up the ice, at the exact same moment, before either of us had a chance to actually know the other. I could barely speak. Vivienne, it wasn't us, the freezing. It wasn't us. Someone did it to us. Someone stood between us in the third week of our marriage and told each of us that the other was ice, so that we would both become ice. And it worked. It worked perfectly, for 3 years, and the someone was Serena, Vivienne said. And the name hung in the moonlit garden like a struck bell, and everything, 3 years of frozen mornings and closed-door voices and dying hope, began, all at once, to rearrange itself into a new and monstrous shape. And I understood, standing among my wife's grandmother's roses at 1 a.m, having just discovered I loved her, that I had also just discovered that our whole marriage had been murdered, deliberately, patiently, by someone we both trusted completely, and that the murder was still in progress, because the divorce papers were still on the table, and the murderer did not yet know that her weapon, the ice, had just been cracked open by a silver mask. I need to tell you about Serena Hayes. Serena was my oldest friend. That is the thing that makes this whole story a wound and not just a plot. I had known Serena since we were children, our families intertwined the way the old dynasties always are, the Coles and the Sterlings, and Serena had been, for most of my life, my closest friend, the one person I could talk to, the one who knew me, or whom I believed knew me, before I ever married. She was brilliant and beautiful and warm and funny, everything the world admired, and she had been at my side through my father's illness and death, through the terrible year I inherited the empire, and she had been, I believed, my truest ally. And when I married Vivienne, Serena had been, or had appeared to be, gracious and generous and glad for me. She had befriended Vivienne. She had made herself, over the first weeks of our marriage, the one person that both Vivienne and I trusted, the shared confidant, the bridge between the new, cold couple, the friend each of us could go to and say the things we couldn't say to each other. Vivienne, alone and hopeful in a strange new house, had found in Serena the one warm, friendly face and had confided in her. And I, married to a woman I couldn't reach, had gone to Serena the way I always had and confided in her. And Serena had taken the trust of two lonely, hopeful, newly married people, and she had used it, in the third week, to tell each of us that the other was ice. And then she had spent 3 years, patiently, tending the frost, because Serena Hayes was the one person perfectly positioned to do it, the trusted friend of both, the bridge that decided what crossed and what didn't. And Serena Hayes had wanted, for reasons I did not yet fully understand that night but would come to understand completely, our marriage to fail. I did not want to believe it. Even standing in that garden with the pattern laid out plain, even with the same lie and the same week proven between us, some part of me, the part that had loved Serena as a friend for 25 years, recoiled and said, "No, not Serena. There must be a misunderstanding. Serena loves me. Serena would never." And Vivienne watched me struggle with it, and she said gently, the wisest thing, "Julian, I know. I don't want to believe it either. She's been my only friend in your family for 3 years. But we have to be sure. We can't accuse the person we both trust most on the strength of one pattern, in a garden, at 1 in the morning, wrecked and desperate to find a reason our marriage isn't our fault. That's not proof. That's hope. And hope has already cost us 3 years." She took my hands. "So here's what we do. We don't confront her. We don't tip our hand. If it's her, if she really did this, then she spent 3 years being very, very good at it, and she's not going to break down and confess because we ask nicely. If it's her, we have to know for certain, and we have to understand why, and we have to be able to prove it before we do anything, because otherwise, she'll simply tell us a new lie, a better one, and we'll believe it, the way we've believed all the others, because we always believe Serena. That's the whole problem. We always believe Serena." Vivienne's eyes were fierce now, the ice replaced with something far more dangerous, the focus of a brilliant woman who has just realized she has been played. "So we're going to find out, quietly, together, whether the person we trust most spent 3 years destroying the best thing either of us ever had, and if she did." Her jaw set. "Then we are going to make very sure she does not get to finish the job. Because Julian, think, the divorce, the papers on our table, that's not the end of her plan, is it? That's the goal of it. She spent 3 years freezing us so that this morning would come, so that I would slide those papers down the table. We're not looking at the wreckage of her work. We're standing in the middle of it, one signature away from completing it for her." She gripped my hands harder. "The masquerade wasn't supposed to happen. The mask wasn't supposed to happen. We were supposed to just, quietly, coldly, sign the papers and drift apart forever, and Serena was supposed to win, and neither of us was ever supposed to know. Tonight was an accident, a silver mask and a struck clock. And it's the only chance we're ever going to get, and if we waste it, if we tip her off before we're ready, she'll finish us, and we'll never even know we were murdered." And I looked at my wife, my brilliant, warm, alive, furious wife, whom I had met 4 hours ago and married 3 years ago, and I felt something rise in me that I had not felt in 3 years, which was the will to fight for something. And I said, "Then we don't tip her off. We go home tonight, and we put the ice back up, in front of everyone, in front of her. We perform the frozen couple exactly the way we have for 3 years. We let her believe the plan is working, that we're divorcing, that we're colder than ever. And underneath it, in secret, the two of us, together, for the first time, we find out exactly what she did, and exactly why, and exactly how to prove it. And we don't tear up those divorce papers, Vivienne, not yet, because tearing them up would tell her everything. We leave them right there on the table where she can see them, and we let her think she's winning, right up until the moment we're ready to show the whole world what she is." I brought her hands to my lips. the first time I had ever kissed any part of her, and I felt her breath catch. She thinks tonight froze us solid. Let's let her keep thinking it, and let's use the thaw she doesn't know about to burn her whole design to the ground. Vivienne looked at me, and slowly, through the last of her tears, she smiled. And it was the smile from behind the silver mask, the warm, alive, dangerous smile. And she said, "Julian Thorne, I think I'm going to like being married to you. It's a shame it took us 3 years and a masquerade to find out." And that was the beginning. Not of our marriage, which had begun 3 years before in a cathedral. Of our alliance. Of the two of us, finally, on the same side, against the person who had spent 3 years making sure we never were. We went home that night in separate cars, performing the ice for the staff and the world one more time, and we passed each other in the great cold hall of the Thorne mansion, and we said goodnight in our closed-door voices, in case anyone was listening. And then, when the house had gone dark and quiet, my wife slipped into my study through the servants' passage, in her nightgown with a robe pulled around her, and we sat down together, for the first time in 3 years, on the same side of a problem, and we began, quietly, to plan the unmasking of Serena Hayes. But across the city, in her own elegant apartment, Serena Hayes was not sleeping either. Because Serena had been at the ball. Serena was always at the ball. And Serena, who had spent 3 years watching Julian and Vivienne Thorne with the patient attention of a gardener tending a poison, had seen something that night that she did not like at all. She had seen me spend the entire evening enraptured by a woman in a silver mask, and she had not known, at first, who the woman was. And she had felt, watching me laugh and lean in and glow the way I had not glowed in 3 years, a hot, ugly spike of the thing that was the real engine of everything she had done, which was that Serena Hayes had been in love with me since we were children, and had watched me marry another woman for the empire, and had decided, in the 3rd week of that marriage, that if she could not have me, she would at least make certain that the woman who did could never truly have me either, and would, in time, give me up, and leave me free and lonely and grateful for the one friend who had stood by me through it all, so that Serena could finally, after a lifetime of waiting, step into the space where a wife had been. That was the why. Love, twisted into its opposite. Serena did not want the empire, though the empire was a lovely bonus, and her family's fortunes did indeed improve enormously if the Thorne-Dubois merger dissolved and the pieces came loose. Serena wanted me, had always wanted me, and had spent 3 years murdering my marriage one lie at a time, so that she could have me at the end of it, and she was so close. This morning's divorce papers were the near final move, and then, at the ball, she had watched her frozen, dutiful, heartbroken Julian light up like a man reborn for a stranger in a silver mask, and it had frightened her, and then she had watched me lift the mask and freeze, and she had seen who was underneath. And Serena Hayes had understood in that instant, faster than I had, exactly what had just happened. That the mask had let Julian and Vivienne do the one thing she had spent 3 years preventing, which was see each other, and that if she did not act, quickly and decisively, 3 years of the most patient work of her life were about to come undone. So Serena Hayes did not sleep that night either. She sat in her elegant apartment and she did not cry, because Serena did not cry, and she thought, coldly, brilliantly, the way she thought about everything, and she made a decision, and the decision was this: that the divorce would be finalized as quickly as humanly possible, before the accident of the silver mask could grow into anything, before Julian could act on whatever he'd felt, that she would use every ounce of her influence over both of them, every thread of the trust she'd spent 3 years building, to rush them apart and finish it. And that if the thaw had gone further than she feared, if the two of them had actually talked, actually compared notes, actually begun to suspect, then she would need to do more than rush the divorce. She would need a new lie, a bigger one, a final one, powerful enough to refreeze whatever the mask had thawed. And Serena Hayes was very, very good at lies. The war had begun, and on one side were 2 people who had loved each other for 3 years and had just discovered it. And on the other was the person they both still trusted most in the world, who knew, now, that she was in danger, and who had a decade of practice at making these 2 warm people believe the worst about each other, and who was about to bend every bit of that terrible skill toward one final task, making absolutely sure that the silver mask had thawed nothing at all. We made 2 rules that first secret night in my study, and they were Vivienne's rules, because Vivienne, it turned out, had the colder and more strategic mind of the 2 of us, which is one of the 10,000 things I did not know about my own wife. The first rule was that in front of everyone, and most of all in front of Serena, we would be more frozen than ever. We would perform a marriage in its death throes. We would let it be seen that the divorce was proceeding, that we could barely stand to be in the same room, that whatever had happened at the ball had, if anything, made things worse. Because the entire power of our position was that Serena did not know we had woken up, and the instant she suspected it, she would strike, and we were not ready for her to strike. And the second rule was that in private, in secret, in the dark hours when the house slept, we would be exactly what we had just discovered we were, which was two people falling helplessly in love, and we would use those hours both to court each other, finally, 3 years late, and to hunt. I cannot fully describe to you what those weeks were like, the double life of them, because it was the most painful and the most wonderful thing I have ever lived through, both at once, all the time. By day, I would pass my wife in the cold hall and say good morning in my closed-door voice, and she would answer in hers, and we would sit at breakfast with the whole frozen length of the table between us, performing the ruin. And it hurt, it genuinely hurt, to armor my face against the woman I now loved, to watch her armor hers against me, to spend the daylight hours pretending to be strangers when every cell in my body wanted to cross the room. And then night would come, and the house would go quiet, and Vivienne would slip through the servants' passage into my study and take off the ice and become the woman from the silver mask, and we would have, for a few stolen hours, the marriage we should have had for 3 years. And it was so tender and so alive and so full of everything we had both been starving for that some nights we forgot, for whole minutes, to hunt at all, and simply sat together learning each other. 3 years of learning crammed into stolen midnight hours, and I would find out that she hummed when she read, and that she was frightened of deep water, and that she had wanted, as a girl, before duty took her, to be a painter, and she would find out that I still, secretly, kept my father's terrible old fishing hat, and that I could not sleep without a window cracked, and that I had never once, in my whole life before her, told anyone that I sometimes felt like an imposter in my own empire. And we fell, and we fell, and we fell, and it was the happiest I have ever been, and it was happening in secret, in the dark, inside the shell of a marriage we were pretending to end, and the pretending was the price of the happiness, and we paid it, every day, because we understood that if we stopped pretending for even one meal, Serena would see, and we would lose everything. But we did not only fall in love in those midnight hours, we also hunted. And the hunting is where the story turns, because the hunting is where we found the letters. Here is how we found them. Vivienne, thinking back over 3 years with her strategist's mind, said one night, "The thing I never understood that hurt the most was the notes. In the first months when I was still hoping, I wrote you things, small things. I'd leave a note on your desk or with your morning papers, nothing dramatic, just reaching. A line about something I'd read that I thought you'd like. Once, our first anniversary, before the ice was fully set, I left you a real letter, a long one, telling you, carefully, that I hoped we could try, that I thought there might be more between us than duty, that I was willing if you were." Her voice caught. "You never answered. Any of them, not one. And I decided that was my answer, that you'd read my reaching and found it beneath you, and hadn't even bothered to acknowledge it. It was the anniversary letter that finally froze me solid, Julian. When you didn't answer that, I stopped. I decided you'd made yourself perfectly clear, and I never reached again. And I sat in my study in the dark and felt the bottom drop out of the world, because I said, 'Vivienne, I never got a single note, not one. I never saw an anniversary letter. If you had left me a letter on our first anniversary telling me you wanted to try, I would have, my God, I would have wept. I would have knocked down the door to your rooms. I was dying for exactly that. I never received it. I never received any of it.' And I felt the pattern turn again, colder and more terrible. 'Who handled your notes? How did they get to me? Where did you leave them?' 'With your morning papers,' she said slowly, 'or on your desk,' which meant they went through. They went through your assistant, Brooke. Brooke. Brooke had been my executive assistant since I inherited the empire. Brooke was efficient and discreet and utterly reliable, the perfect gatekeeper, the person who handled everything that reached me, my papers, my correspondence, my schedule, the flow of my entire life. And Brooke, I realized, going cold all over, had also been recommended to me 3 years ago when I first needed an assistant by my oldest and most trusted friend, who had said, 'Julian, you need someone completely reliable, someone loyal. Let me help. I know exactly the person,' and who had, of course, been Serena. Serena had placed Brooke at the exact choke point of my life, the gate through which everything reached me. In the same season, she began to freeze my marriage, and I had never once questioned it, because why would I question a gift from my oldest friend? And for 3 years, everything Vivienne had ever tried to send me, every note, Every reaching, every letter, had passed through the hands of a woman who answered, secretly, not to me, but to Serena Hayes, and had, I now understood with sick certainty, never reached me at all. We had to be careful, so careful, because Brooke was Serena's eyes and ears at the center of my life, and if Brooke sensed that I had woken up, Serena would know within the hour. So we did not confront Brooke. Instead, over the following days, moving with a caution that nearly killed me, Vivienne and I set out to find the intercepted letters, because a person like Brooke, a careful person, a person who might one day need leverage or protection, does not always destroy the evidence. Sometimes she keeps it, and we gambled that somewhere, in Brooke's meticulous records, there might be a trail. And there was. It took us 9 days of me quietly, casually, over the course of ordinary business, gaining access to the archives of my own office that I had always let Brooke manage. 9 days of Vivienne, brilliant Vivienne, cross-referencing dates and building the map. And on the 9th night, she came through the servants' passage with her face white and her hands shaking, holding a slim folder, and she set it down on my desk, and she could not speak, and I opened it, and inside were the letters. Not all of them. Brooke had destroyed most, I think, but she had kept some, a handful, the way careful people keep a handful of everything. And among the handful, God help me, was the anniversary letter. Vivienne's anniversary letter. 3 years old, in my wife's careful hand, the letter that had frozen her solid when I never answered it. And I had never answered it because I had never seen it, because it had been intercepted before it ever reached me and filed away in the private records of a woman who worked for Serena Hayes. And I sat in my study at 2 in the morning and I read, for the first time, 3 years too late, the letter my wife had written me on our first anniversary, telling me she hoped we could try, that she thought there might be more between us than duty, that she was willing if I was. I am not ashamed to tell you that I wept. I wept the way I had wept in the garden, but worse, because in the garden I had grieved 3 lost years in the abstract, and now I was holding the specific, physical, particular proof of the moment we could have been saved. The letter that would have changed everything, that had been sitting in a folder 20 feet from my office for 3 years while my wife and I froze to death, believing we were unloved. And I read it 4 times, and then I looked up at Vivienne, who was watching me read the letter she had written 3 years ago and never known if I'd seen. And I said, I would have said yes. Vivienne, if I had gotten this, on our first anniversary, I would have said yes to every word of it. I would have run to you. We would have had 3 years. We would have had everything. And she took it. She took it out of my hands before I ever knew it existed. She stole 3 years of our lives with a folder and a lie. And Vivienne came around the desk and knelt beside my chair and put her arms around me while I held her 3-year-old letter and wept for the life it should have bought us. And she said, fiercely, into my shoulder, then we take the 3 years back. Not the ones we lost, we can't have those, but all the ones that come after, every single one. We take them back from her, Julian, and we make them so good, so full, so alive, that the 3 years she stole become the smallest part of our whole long life together. That's how we win. Not just by exposing her, by being so happy for so long that her theft becomes a footnote. But first, and she pulled back, and her face was wet, but her eyes were steel, and there was the strategist, there was the woman I was falling more in love with every single midnight. First we finish gathering, and then we destroy her, because now we have the letter. Now we have proof that the notes were intercepted. And a woman like Brooke, who keeps a folder like this, keeps it for a reason, and I would bet my life that this folder is not the only thing she's keeping, and that somewhere in what Brooke has hidden away to protect herself, there is a thread that leads straight to Serena, and we are going to find it. But even as we hunted, Serena was moving, because Serena was always moving, and I have to tell you what she was doing in those same weeks, because we did not know it at the time, and it nearly destroyed us. Serena, you'll recall, had spent the night of the ball deciding that the divorce must be finalized as fast as possible, before the accident of the silver mask could grow into anything. And she had spent the week since executing exactly that, and she had done it through the 2 things she was best at, her influence over both of us and her genius for lies. She came to me, in those weeks, as my oldest friend, my confidant, the one who had stood by me through everything, and she was gentle, and she was concerned, and she said, Julian, I heard about the divorce, and I'm so sorry. I know how hard this must be, but between us, I think it's the right thing. You've been so unhappy for 3 years. She's never let you in, and I say this as your friend, the friend who's watched you suffer. You deserve to be free. You deserve someone who actually loves you, someone warm, and I don't want to see you drag this out and let her hurt you any longer than you have to. Sign the papers, Julian. Let yourself be free. And then, when you're ready, when the dust has settled, well. And she had let the sentence hang, and touched my arm, and looked at me in a way that 3 years ago, before I loved my wife, I might not even have registered, but that I now saw with perfect clarity for what it was: an invitation, a promise, the next move in a plan. And I had to sit there and pretend to be the grateful, heartbroken friend, and I had to say, "You're right, Serena, you've always looked out for me." And it was the hardest acting I have ever done, because what I wanted to do was tell her that I knew, that I saw her, that I had read the letter, and I could not yet, because we were not ready. And so I smiled at the person who had stolen 3 years of my life, and I called her my friend. And she went to Vivienne too, of course, the same weeks, the same gentle poison. She came to my wife as her one friend in the cold thorn world, and she said, "Vivienne, I'm so glad you're finally doing this, finally freeing yourself. He's never deserved you. You've given 3 years to a man who couldn't be bothered to know you, and I've watched you shrink, and it's broken my heart, and you deserve to be free and happy. So please, don't let him or the families talk you out of it. Don't let them delay it. Finalize it quickly and start your life." And Vivienne had to sit there and thank her, and agree, and perform the grateful, heartbroken friend, exactly as I did, and we would compare notes at midnight and marvel at the sheer scale of it, the way Serena played both of us at once, from both sides, driving us apart with one hand on each of our shoulders, calling it love. But rushing the divorce was only Serena's first response to the ball. Because Serena, brilliant Serena, had not survived and thrived for 3 years by underestimating things, and some instinct, some cold animal sense, had told her that the silver mask might have thawed more than she could see. And so she prepared, in those weeks, a second move, a bigger one, a lie held in reserve, a bomb to detonate if the rushed divorce showed any sign of stalling. And the lie she prepared was the most dangerous one of all, because it was aimed at the exact thing that had woken us up: trust. Because Serena understood, better than anyone, that the only thing that could truly defeat her was Julian and Vivienne trusting each other. And she understood that the silver mask had, perhaps, begun to build exactly that. And so she prepared a lie designed to poison it at the root, a lie designed to make each of us doubt the other all over again, worse than before, a lie designed to take the fragile new trust between us and turn it into the deepest betrayal. And she waited, patient as always, for the moment to use it. And the moment came sooner than she'd hoped, because we made a mistake. We got careless, just once. After 9 days of perfect performance, after finding the letter, we were so raw and so full of each other that one afternoon, in a corridor of the Thorne mansion, believing ourselves alone, I reached out and touched Vivienne's hand. Just for a second, just a brush of fingers, a single crack in the ice we were performing, and it was nothing. It lasted a heartbeat, and we sprang apart instantly, and we thought no one had seen. But Brooke had seen. Brooke, who watched everything, who worked for Serena, had seen the frozen couple's fingers brush in a corridor, had seen the thing that was not supposed to be possible: warmth, between two people who were supposed to be ice. And Brooke had reported it to Serena within the hour. And Serena had understood, immediately, that her worst fear was real, that the silver mask had thawed them, that Julian and Vivienne were no longer frozen, were perhaps even allied, were perhaps even, God forbid, beginning to suspect her, and that the time for patience was over, and the time for the bomb had come. And so Serena Hayes reached for the lie she had prepared, the big one, the one aimed at our new and fragile trust, and she prepared to detonate it. And it was a very, very good lie. And it very nearly worked. And it is the reason that the story, which had turned from tragedy to hope, was about to turn, for one terrible stretch, back toward tragedy. Because the person hunting us was better at this than we were, and we were about to learn exactly how much better. Serena came to me 3 days after the corridor, and she was not gentle this time. She was grave and frightened, and she wore the face of a friend who has discovered a terrible thing and does not want to be the one to say it. And it was the finest performance I have ever seen, and I nearly believed it. And I want you to understand why I nearly believed it, because it is the whole horror of what a truly skilled liar can do. "Julian," she said, sitting across from me in my study, her hands twisting in her lap, her eyes wet, "I have to tell you something, and I have gone back and forth for 2 days about whether to, because I know how it's going to sound, and I know you're going to be angry, maybe at me, and I've decided I'd rather have you angry at me than let you walk into a trap, because that's what friends are for, even when it costs them." She took a shaking breath. "I don't think the divorce is what you think it is. I don't think Vivienne wants to be free of you. I think Vivienne wants Thorne Group." and I think she's found a way to take it. I made myself go still. What are you talking about? The night of the ball, Serena said. Something changed. I saw it. Everyone saw it. Suddenly you and Vivienne, who've barely spoken in 3 years, are, I don't know, different. Careful. And I've been so worried, and so I did something I'm ashamed of, Julian. I looked into it, because I care about you, and what I found... She pressed her hand to her mouth. Vivienne has been meeting in secret with lawyers. Not divorce lawyers, corporate lawyers, Dubois lawyers, and with your assistant, Brooke. And I think, Julian, I think the divorce was never real. I think it was the opening move. I think Vivienne and her family realized that a divorce would dissolve the merger and leave the Thorn Group vulnerable, weakened, exposed, exactly the way it was when your father died. And I think Vivienne has been building a case, quietly, for 3 years, documenting everything, every private thing you ever said. And I think she's going to use the divorce not to leave you, but to gut you, to take the Thorn Group apart in the settlement. And I think the sudden thaw, the sudden warmth, whatever's been happening since the ball, is her lowering your guard, making you trust her, making you soft, right before she takes everything your family built. Serena's tears spilled over. I'm so sorry. I know how this sounds. I know you want to believe she's changed. But Julian, please, please, don't let 3 years of ice fool you into thinking a few warm weeks are real. The warmth is the weapon. It always has been. I've watched her play you for 3 years, and now she's playing you again, and I could not live with myself if I stayed silent and watched her destroy you. And I sat there, and I want to tell you that I saw through it instantly, that my new love for Vivienne was a fortress that no lie could breach. But that would be a lie. And this is a story about the cost of lies. The truth is that Serena's poison found a crack, and it found the crack because it was aimed with 3 years of intimate knowledge of exactly where my cracks were, and the crack it found was this. I had known Vivienne, truly known her, for 3 weeks. 3 weeks. And I had known the ice for 3 years. And Serena's lie did the one thing a great lie does. It took the true facts. Vivienne was brilliant. Vivienne was strategic. Vivienne had every reason to protect the Dubois interests. The divorce would dissolve the merger. Brooke was involved somehow, and it wove them into a shape that was almost as plausible as the truth. More plausible in some ways, because it fit the 3 years of ice better than the 3 weeks of warmth did. And it whispered the thing that every insecure heart whispers. Are you sure? Are you really sure? Is it possible this warm, alive miracle is too good to be true? Is it possible you are being played? And I am ashamed. I am so ashamed to tell you that for about 2 days, the poison worked, and I doubted her. I did not doubt her fully, but I doubted her enough. Enough that when Vivienne came through the servants' passage that night, I was cold. Not performing cold, actually cold, guarded, and she felt it instantly, because she knew me now, and she said, "What's wrong? Something's wrong. You've got the wall up, and it's not for show, it's for me. What happened?" And I should have told her. I know that now. The right thing, the thing a trusting partner does, was to say, "Vivienne, Serena told me something today, and it got into me, and I don't believe it, but I can't get it out. Help me get it out." That is what I should have said. Instead, poisoned, doubting, 3 weeks of trust losing to 3 years of ice, I did the thing that nearly cost us everything. I tested her. I said, coldly, "Are you meeting with corporate lawyers, Dubois lawyers, about the settlement, about the Thorn Group?" And I watched Vivienne's face change, watched the hurt bloom in it, and then, worse, watched the hurt turn to a terrible understanding, and she said, very quietly, "Serena told you that, didn't she? That I'm after the company, that the thaw is a trick, that I'm playing you." And when I didn't answer, she laughed, a broken, awful laugh, and said, "And it worked. Look at your face. It worked, Julian. 3 weeks. It took her 3 days to undo 3 weeks, because 3 weeks of real is no match for 3 years of poison, and she knows it. She's always known it. That's the whole reason it took her 3 days and not 3 seconds." Her eyes filled. "So let me ask you something, and I want you to really think before you answer, because your answer is going to tell me whether we have any chance at all." "Yes, I've been meeting with lawyers. Corporate lawyers. Do you know why? Because 2 weeks ago, you and I decided to expose Serena. And exposing a person like Serena, a person woven into both our families and both our companies, is a legal minefield. And I have been quietly, carefully, laying the groundwork for how we prove what she did and survive the fallout. Protecting you, protecting the Thorn Group, from exactly the kind of chaos her exposure will cause. And I was doing it in secret, because we agreed everything had to be in secret. And I didn't tell you the details because you've been so raw about the letters that I wanted to spare you the ugly logistics until I had a plan. That's the truth. I've been meeting with lawyers to protect you. Her voice broke completely. And Serena took that true fact, that I've been meeting with lawyers, and she poured her poison over it and handed it to you, and you drank it. In 3 days. So here's my question, Julian. When you have to choose between what Serena tells you and what you know about me from the inside, from the garden, from the letters, from every midnight, when the two are in conflict, which one wins? Because if the answer is Serena, if 3 days of her lies can beat 3 weeks of us, then she's already won, and there's no point in any of this, and I'll sign the papers tomorrow and let her have you, because I will not, spend the rest of my life married to a man who chooses her voice over mine every time she gets frightened enough to whisper. And she stood there, my wife, wrecked, waiting, having laid the whole thing bare, and I understood that I was standing at the single most important moment of my entire life, and that I had, for 2 poisoned days, been standing on the wrong side of it, and that everything, the marriage, the war, the rest of both our lives, came down to what I said next. And what saved me in the end was not cleverness, and it was not evidence. What saved me was the memory of the silver mask. Because I looked at my wife's wrecked face, and I thought about the woman in the silver mask, the woman I had fallen for before I knew who she was, before there was any possible trick, any possible agenda, any possible con. Because when I fell for the woman in the silver mask, I did not know she was Vivienne, and she did not know I was falling for someone I was married to. And there was no lawyer, and no company, and no settlement, and no plan. There was just 2 people who could not see each other's faces, discovering that they were, underneath everything, exactly right for each other. And that had been real. That had been the realest thing in my whole life, and no amount of Serena's poison could touch it, because it had happened before any of the poison could possibly apply. And I had let myself forget it for 2 days, and I was never going to forget it again. "The mask," I said. My voice broke. "Vivienne, I forgot the mask. For 2 days I let her make me forget the mask, and I'm so sorry, I'm so ashamed, because the mask is the answer to your question. When I fell for you at the ball, I didn't know you were my wife. You didn't know I was falling for a man you were married to. There was no trick possible, no plan, no agenda, no company, no settlement, nothing. There was just you, the real you, and the real me, meeting for the first time with no history and no armor. And we fell, instantly, completely. And it was the truest thing that has ever happened to me, and it happened before a single one of Serena's lies could possibly apply. That's your answer. When Serena's voice and the mask are in conflict, the mask wins. The mask will always win. Because the mask is the one moment in my whole life I know for certain was real, and it told me who you are, and I believe it, and I'm sorry, I'm so sorry, that I let her make me forget it for even 2 days. And I swear to you, on the mask, on the garden, on the letter you wrote me 3 years ago that I would have said yes to, I swear I will never choose her voice over yours again, not ever, not once, for the rest of my life. Please, please forgive me. I drank the poison, but I just remembered the cure, and the cure is you, and I am never going to forget it again." And Vivienne looked at me for a long, long moment, weighing it, weighing whether 3 weeks in a mask were enough to survive the fact that I had doubted her. And I stood there and let her weigh it, because she had every right. And finally, slowly, she crossed the room, and she put her hand on my face, the way she had in the garden, and she said, through her tears, "The mask wins. Okay, the mask wins." And then, fiercely, "But Julian, hear me, because this is the most important thing I will ever say to you. That is exactly how she'll beat us. Not with a big blow. With this. With small poisons, aimed at our trust, one at a time, forever, using everything she knows about our cracks. And every single time it will be almost plausible. And every single time it will find a real fact to hang itself on. And if we let her, she will spend the rest of our lives making us doubt each other 3 days at a time. And eventually, one of the doubts will stick. Because that's how it works. You only have to lose once. So we cannot just survive this one. We have to end her. Fast. Because as long as Serena Hayes is free, and near us, and trusted, our marriage is a house with a poisoner living in the walls, and no love, however real, survives that forever. The mask won tonight, but the mask won't win every night for 50 years. So we stop playing defense. Tonight, we stop waiting to gather the perfect case. We take what we have, and we build a trap, and we end her. before she gets another 3 days to whisper. And that was the night the war turned, because that was the night we stopped hunting and started trapping. And it was Vivienne's idea, and it was brilliant. And it used the one thing Serena could not resist, which was her own certainty that she was smarter than everyone, and her own hunger, the real engine underneath everything, the thing she had wanted since we were children, which was me. But before I tell you about the trap, I have to tell you about Sophia, because Sophia is the reason we had what we needed, and because Sophia is one of the two people in this story, along with the boy Finn in a different story I once heard, who were braver than any of the powerful people around them. Sophia was Vivienne's maid. She had come with Vivienne from the Dubois house 3 years ago, the one person from her old life Vivienne had been allowed to bring into the cold thorn marriage, and Sophia had spent 3 years watching, quietly, invisibly, the way servants watch. And Sophia loved Vivienne, truly loved her, the way you love someone whose diapers you changed, because Sophia had been Vivienne's nurse when Vivienne was a baby, and had stayed with her ever since. And Sophia had spent 3 years watching her girl freeze to death in a loveless house, and grieving it, and being unable to do anything about it. And when Vivienne, in those secret weeks, finally, cautiously, told Sophia the truth, the whole truth, the mask and the garden and the letters and Serena, Sophia had gone very still. And then Sophia had said, "I have to show you something, my girl. Something I have kept for 3 years and been afraid to show you because I was afraid of what it would do to you, and now I think you need it." And Sophia had produced, from wherever old loyal servants keep the things that matter, a small collection of things she had quietly rescued over 3 years, things she had seen thrown away or intercepted and had, on instinct, on love, retrieved and kept, not understanding their full meaning, but understanding that they mattered. And among them were more of Vivienne's intercepted notes, and, more importantly, something else. Something Sophia had seen and saved without knowing what it was, which was a torn page from Brooke's own private notebook, retrieved from a wastebasket 2 years ago because Sophia had seen Vivienne's name on it and could not bear to let anything with her girl's name be simply thrown away. And on that torn page, in Brooke's careful hand, was a note that said, "Anniversary letter intercepted per V. Do not deliver. Confirm with V redisposal." Per V? Confirm with V. Sophia, out of pure love, watching over her girl for 3 years, had unknowingly rescued the single most important piece of physical evidence in the entire war. A note in Brooke's own hand, referencing V, proving that the interception of Vivienne's letters had been done on someone's instruction. Someone called V. And while a torn page saying V was not by itself enough to destroy Serena Hayes, it was the thread, the first hard physical thread that connected Brooke's interceptions to a person. And it was the thing that let us stop guessing and start proving. And we had it, because a maid named Sophia had loved a girl enough to save a torn page from a wastebasket 2 years before anyone knew it would matter. I have thought a great deal since about the fact that in the end, it was not my empire or Vivienne's brilliance or all the resources of 2 great dynasties that gave us the thread we needed. It was the love of a servant. It was Sophia, invisible, powerless, watching over her girl for 3 years and saving the things with her name on them, who handed us the key. The powerful spent 3 years being manipulated. The maid spent 3 years quietly saving the evidence out of love, without even knowing it was evidence. There is a lesson in that, the same lesson as in every story worth telling, which is that the people the powerful overlook are the ones who see everything, and that love, patient and invisible and powerless, is in the end stronger than all the cleverness in the world. We had the thread, we had the letter, we had the pattern, we had the torn page that said V, and now we had a plan, Vivienne's plan, to take all of it and set a trap that would make Serena Hayes hand us the rest herself, because the one thing we still did not have was Serena's own words, Serena's own confession, the proof that would let us destroy her not just privately, but completely, in front of everyone, the way she had spent 3 years destroying us in the dark. And to get it, we were going to have to give Serena the one thing she wanted most in the world. We were going to have to make her believe she had won. The plan had 3 parts, and the first part was Brooke, my executive assistant, the woman Serena had placed at the choke point of my life 3 years ago, the woman who had intercepted every note Vivienne ever tried to send me. Vivienne understood, before I did, that Brooke was the crack in Serena's wall. "Brooke isn't loyal to Serena," Vivienne said. "Brooke is afraid of Serena, or paid by her, or both. And fear loyalty is the weakest loyalty there is. It flees the instant a bigger fear appears. So we change the math. We make loyalty to Serena the dangerous choice, and turning on her the safe one." We went to Brooke in my study, late, just the 2 of us, and we laid on the desk the torn page Sophia had saved, the one in Brooke's own hand that said, "Intercept anniversary letter, confirm with V." And we watched 3 years of composure drain out of Brooke's face, and Vivienne, magnificent, terrifying, let the silence work, and then offered Brooke a door. Immunity, a quiet exit, a life without Serena, in exchange for everything, all 3 years of records, and her help catching Serena in her own words. Brooke took the safe door in about 11 seconds, which told us everything about the kind of power Serena had built, the kind that runs on fear and evaporates the instant it costs anyone anything. Brooke gave us the records, and, more valuable than any record, she gave us the map of how Serena thought, and the exact bait Serena could not resist. She's never really wanted the money, or even the company, Brooke told us. Those were how she kept score. What she's wanted, since you were both children, is him. She nodded at me, and it was awful to hear it said plainly. The whole 3 years, all of it, it was about making sure that if she couldn't have you, no one could, and that eventually your wife would leave, and you'd be free and lonely, and there she'd be, the loyal friend who stood by you, and you'd finally turn to her. That's the ending she's been building, and that's how you'll trap her. A person who wants power you can't fool, they're too careful. But a person who's wanted one specific man for 25 years, at the exact moment she thinks she's finally won him, will drop every guard she has. Make her believe she's finally got you, and she'll say too much. She won't be able to help it. There was the trap, whole and terrible and built out of the villain's own deepest want. So, we let the divorce proceed. Publicly, completely, we let it finalize, because Serena was too clever to be fooled by a fake one. Vivienne and I stood in a lawyer's office and legally ended a marriage we intended to remake within the week. And we did it because the only way to make Serena drop her guard was to hand her the completed ending she'd spent 3 years building. In the car afterward, Vivienne gripped my hand hard enough to hurt and said, "It's just paper. Tell me it's just paper." And I said, "It's just paper. You're my wife. You'll always be my wife. We're borrowing her lie for a few days to end her with it." And we held on to each other like two people in a storm. And then, over the days that followed, I turned to Serena. Slowly. Believably. I let my oldest friend watch a heartbroken, freshly single Julian Thorne begin, at last, to lean on her. I called her more. I let the warmth grow. I let her see me look at her, once or twice, the way a newly free man looks at the woman who was there all along. It made me sick, because for 25 years I had loved Serena as a friend, and even knowing what she was, there was grief in watching her light up with a joy that was real, even though it was built on a monstrous thing. But I did it, because Vivienne was right that a poisoner in the walls cannot be allowed to live there, and because my whole life now depended on ending her. The night we sprang the trap, I invited Serena to the Thorne mansion, to my study, alone, late. I told her the divorce had made me see clearly at last, that I had something to say I'd never said before. And Serena Hayes came glowing, radiant, 25 years of patient want about to be rewarded, and she had no idea that in the next room sat Vivienne, and Brooke, and a lawyer, and a recorder, and that everything she was about to say in her happiness was about to become the instrument of her ruin. She came in, and she sat, and she was luminous, and I poured her a drink, and I sat across from her, and I said carefully, "Serena, we've known each other our whole lives, and since the divorce I've been thinking about how I never really saw you. All those years. You were right there, and I married someone else, and it cost me 3 years, and now I'm free, and I find myself wondering what I was so blind to." I let it hang, and I watched her breath catch. I need to understand something first, though, because I'm starting to see things about the marriage I didn't understand while I was in it, how it went so wrong, so fast. And I have this feeling that you understand it better than I do, that you saw things I didn't. Am I wrong? And Serena Hayes, glowing, triumphant, 25 years of want finally being answered, believing with her whole heart that the man she loved was at last, turning to her and asking her to help him understand his own liberation, dropped her guard, all the way, exactly as Brooke had promised she would. She smiled, this soft, intimate, conspiratorial smile, the smile of a woman finally able to share a secret with the one person she'd always wanted to share everything with. And she said, "Oh, Julian, my poor Julian, you were never blind. You were protected. I protected you. From her, from the whole cold, loveless thing. For 3 years I stood between you and the worst of it, and you never even knew." She leaned forward, warm, unguarded, happy. "You want to understand how it went wrong? It didn't go wrong, my love. I made it go wrong. Because I could not stand to watch you throw your life away on a marriage of duty to a cold woman who could never love you the way I do. So I helped it fail. I helped it fail so you could be free, so you could finally be with someone who actually loves you, someone who's loved you since we were children. And I know how that sounds. But everything I did, every single thing, I did for you. For us. And now here we are. And it worked. It finally worked, and I am not sorry. I will never be sorry, because look. Look, we're finally here. And I said quietly, my heart hammering, one word away from having everything. What did you do, Serena? Tell me. All of it. I want to understand exactly how you saved me. And she told me. Everything. The lie in the third week, the same lie to each of us, timed with surgical precision to kill our hope at exactly the moment it was most fragile. Brooke, placed at the choke point of my life to intercept everything Vivienne ever tried to send me. The anniversary letter, the one Vivienne wrote begging to try, the one that would have saved us, read by Serena herself, and destroyed because it was too dangerous. 3 years of tending the frost, of small poisons, of standing between us with a hand on each of our shoulders, driving us apart while we thanked her for her friendship. The engineering of the divorce itself, and, God help her, the recent lie, the one about Vivienne being after the company, the one that had nearly worked. She laughed about that one. She actually laughed. That was some of my best work, honestly. I saw you two getting warm after the ball, and I panicked, and I turned it around in 3 days. 3 days, Julian. I made you doubt her all over again. 3 weeks of thaw, and I refroze you in 3 days, because I know exactly where your cracks are. I've known you my whole life. I know you better than she ever could. That's why we belong together. Don't you see? I'm the only one who's ever really known you. She confessed all of it. Every crime, every lie, every stolen letter, every poisoned day. 3 years of the most patient malice laid out in loving detail in the study of the house she had helped to freeze, into a recorder behind a door, in front of the wife she thought she destroyed. Because she believed in that moment that she had finally won the thing she'd wanted her whole life. And a person who believes they have finally won love will confess anything to it. And when she finished, when she sat back, glowing, spent, having poured out 3 years of secret work like a love letter, waiting for me to take her in my arms at last, I set down my glass. And I looked at the woman who had stolen 3 years of my life. Serena, I did love you. As a friend. For 25 years. That was real, on my side, and I will grieve it for the rest of my life. Because the friend I loved for 25 years never actually existed, and I only found that out 3 weeks ago. I stood up. But you asked if I was blind all those years, and the answer is yes. I was blind to exactly one thing, and it wasn't you. I was blind to my own wife, and you're the one who blinded me. Her smile began, very slowly, to die. You stood between me and the only person I have ever truly loved for 3 years, and you called it saving me. It wasn't saving me. It was the cruelest thing one human being has ever done to another. You didn't just hurt me. You stole 3 years of 2 people's lives. You stole a letter that would have saved us. You took a thing that could have been the best love this city ever saw, and you froze it to death one lie at a time. And you did it while we thanked you. My voice broke. And you have the audacity to sit in this house and call it love. Julian, she whispered, you don't know what love is. Love doesn't freeze people to have them. Love doesn't steal letters. Love doesn't stand between 2 people and call it protection. I looked at her. I know what love is now. I finally know. Because I met it 3 weeks ago behind a silver mask, and it is the exact opposite of everything you have ever done to me. And I am going to spend the rest of my life inside it. And you are going to spend the rest of yours understanding that the thing you did for love destroyed the only chance you ever had at it, because I could never, ever love a person who could do what you just confessed to doing. I watched it hit her. I watched the glow die. I watched Serena Hayes understand in real time that she had not won, that the warmth had been bait, that the man turning to her had been a trap, and that she had just, in her triumph, confessed everything. I watched her look toward the door and understand, before it even opened, exactly what was behind it. And the door opened, and Vivienne walked out. Vivienne walked out of that room, and I want you to understand what she looked like, because I will see it for the rest of my life. She was not crying. She was not raging. She was the woman from the silver mask and the woman from the ice at the same time, the whole person, warm and terrible, and she crossed that study slowly, and Serena Hayes shrank back into the chair like something dying. Hello, Serena, Vivienne said. Vivienne, Serena's voice was a ruin. You have to understand, I never meant. You meant every word. Vivienne's voice was very quiet. You just said them out loud for the first time. That's the only difference between tonight and the last 3 years. She stopped in front of the chair. I'm not going to shout at you. I'm not going to hit you, though God knows I want to. I'm going to tell you one thing, and then I'm going to have you removed from my house, and then I am never going to think about you again. Because you have already had 3 years of my life, and you are not getting 1 more hour. Serena stared up at her. You told me, in the 3rd week of my marriage, that my husband found me cold and exhausting and regretted marrying me. Vivienne's voice did not waver. Do you know what I did that night, Serena? I sat on the floor of a bathroom in a house where I knew no one, and I cried until I was sick, and then I stood up and I decided that I would never let him see me want anything from him again, because I could not survive being that humiliated twice. She let that land. I was 26 years old. I had left my whole family and my whole life to marry a stranger for my father's empire, and I was so lonely I could not breathe, and the one friend I had in that cold house came to me kindly and told me that the only person who might have saved me despised me. And I believed you, because you were my friend. Serena made a sound. And every single day for 3 years after that, I sat across a breakfast table from a man I was falling in love with, and I put ice on my own face so he wouldn't see it, because you had told me he found me exhausting. Vivienne's composure finally cracked, one hairline fracture. You took the best thing in my life and you convinced me it hated me, and you did it while holding my hand. So no, I don't hate you, Serena. Hate takes energy, and you have taken enough of mine. She straightened. I pity you, because you have wanted one man for 25 years and you have never once, in all that time, wondered what he actually wanted. You didn't want Julian. You wanted to win Julian. And a person who thinks those are the same thing has never been in love in their life, and never will be, and will die alone still calling it devotion. She turned away, and it was the most complete dismissal I have ever witnessed. Get out of my house, Vivienne said. You'll hear from our lawyers in the morning. And Serena Hayes, 25 years of patient malice, 3 years of surgical cruelty, sat in that chair for one long moment, and then she did the thing that told me she had never understood anything at all. She turned to me, past my wife, and she said, Julian, please. Everything I did because I love you. And I said the last words I have ever said to her. I know, I said. That's the worst part. Brooke, being Brooke, had already called the security detail. They took Serena Hayes out of the Thorne mansion at 2 a.m, and I stood in the doorway of my father's study, holding my wife's hand, and watched a 25-year friendship walk out of my life forever. And I felt, underneath the grief, something I had not felt in 3 years. I felt the house get warmer. The rest, the legal part, was almost boring, which is its own kind of justice. Because here is the thing about a confession like that. It doesn't only end a person socially. Serena had, in her happiness, in her need to be admired for her cleverness, described 3 years of tortious interference, of conspiracy with an employee to intercept private correspondence, of the systematic, documented, deliberate destruction of a marriage that was also, legally, a corporate merger between 2 of the largest dynasties in the city. That last part turned out to matter enormously, because the Thorne-Dubois merger was not just a marriage, it was a contract. And a person who deliberately, provably sabotages a contract of that size, using an employee she suborned in order to cause the dissolution of a merger she stood to profit from, because the Hayes family's fortunes improved measurably if Thorne and Dubois came apart, has not merely committed a moral crime. She has committed several extremely expensive legal ones. Vivienne's lawyers and Dubois lawyers are a special kind of terrifying, took Serena's recorded confession and Brooke's 3 years of records and the intercepted letters, and they built something that Serena Hayes' fortune could not survive. She was ruined, financially and socially, within 4 months. The Hayes family cut her loose the instant the confession leaked into the right rooms, because families like that always do. And Serena learned, at the end, that the loyalty she had spent her life leveraging was the exact kind that evaporates the moment it costs anything. I did not enjoy it. I want to be honest about that. I sat with the news of her ruin and I felt sick, because a part of me was 12 years old and she was my best friend and we were climbing a tree behind her father's house. Vivienne found me that night and she did not tell me to stop grieving. She just sat with me. That's how I knew, all the way down, that I had married the right person. She let me mourn the woman who destroyed us because she understood that the grief was proof I had loved honestly, and that a man who could not mourn a friend, even a monstrous one, would not be a man worth loving. "You're allowed to be sad," Vivienne said. "Just don't be sad and confused at the same time. Be sad and clear. She was your friend. She also did this. Both are true. Hold them both, and then put them down." I held them both, and then, slowly, over months, I put them down. Brooke got her quiet exit. She testified, fully, and she walked away with immunity and a reference she did not deserve, and I gave her anyway, because she was a frightened woman who made a terrible choice for 3 years and then made one good one, and because Vivienne said something I have never forgotten. "The system that produced Brooke is the same system that produced us," she said. "A house where everyone is afraid and no one talks, and the only person who seems safe is the one doing the poisoning. We don't fix that by destroying the smallest person in it. We fix it by never building that house again." So we didn't. We built a different one. We were, at this point, legally divorced. I want to sit in that for a second, because it is the strangest fact of my life. The night we destroyed Serena Hayes, the night we finally, completely understood that we had loved each other for 3 years, Vivienne Dubois and Julian Thorne were, on paper, in the eyes of the state, 2 unmarried strangers who had once been briefly and unhappily wed. We had done it on purpose. It had been the bait, and it had worked perfectly. And now it was 3 in the morning, and Serena was gone, and the house was quiet, and we were standing in the wreckage of a war we had just won. Divorced. Vivienne started laughing first. That was the thing I loved most about her, in the end, that she laughed at exactly the moments when other people would break. She sat down on the floor of my father's study, in her dress, at 3 in the morning, and she laughed until she cried, and then she just cried. And I sat down on the floor next to her and pulled her against my chest, and she cried 3 years of it out into my shirt while I held her. "We're divorced," she said into my shirt. "Julian, we won and we're divorced. I got the man of my dreams and a signed decree ending my marriage to him on the same night. Is this funny? I can't tell if this is funny." "It's a little funny," I said. "It's very funny," she said, and cried harder. And then, at some point, she sat up and wiped her face and looked at me with those eyes I had spent 3 years not seeing, and she said, "Julian, ask me." And I understood exactly what she meant, and my heart went into my throat, and I said, "Vivienne, I've known you for 3 years, and I met you 3 weeks ago. I have loved you since a dinner party where you slipped your dessert to a serving boy, and I have wasted 1,000 days I will never get back. I don't want to be free. I have never wanted to be free. I want to be caught. I want to be caught by you for the rest of my life." My voice broke. "Marry me. Again. Properly. Not for the empire, not for our fathers, not for a merger. For nothing at all. Just for us. Marry me because I would rather have 1 honest year with the woman behind that mask than 50 more years of being the head of anything." And Vivienne Dubois, who had thrown divorce papers at me across a breakfast table 5 weeks earlier, put her hands on my face and said, "Yes. God, yes. But Julian." She smiled through the tears, and there was the woman in the silver mask, and there was my wife, and they were the same person, and always had been. "I have one condition. Anything. We tell each other the truth, out loud, always, even when it's humiliating, especially when it's humiliating." Her hands tightened. "That's how she got us. Not with a lie, with our silence. She could only make you believe I was cold because you never once asked me, and I could only believe you were cold because I never once asked you. 3 years, and neither of us ever said the words out loud because we were too proud, or too scared, or too well raised. Serena didn't destroy our marriage, Julian. She just poured poison into a silence we had already built." She held my eyes. "So promise me. No more silence. If you're hurt, you say it. If you're afraid, you say it. If someone tells you something about me, you come to me, that same day, and you ask. Even if it makes you look like a fool, especially then. Because I would rather have a husband who looks like a fool 100 times than a husband who freezes to death being dignified." "I promise," I said. "No more silence. Say it like you mean it." "I promise," I said. "For the rest of my life, I will ask you, out loud, like an idiot, every time." "Good," said my wife. "Then yes, 1,000 times yes." We remarried 11 days later. It was not the wedding we'd had the first time. The first one had 900 guests and 3 cathedrals worth of flowers, and both our fathers watching a merger complete itself. This one had 11 people. It was in the garden. Vivienne's grandmother's garden. The one behind the high hedge where she'd hidden as a girl when she needed to be somewhere no one could see her. The one where we had first taken off the ice at 1 in the morning and wept among the roses. We got married in that garden, in front of 11 people who had actually earned the right to be there. And Vivienne wore a simple dress, and I could not stop looking at her face, her actual face, no mask, no ice, just her. And when the officiant asked if I would take this woman, I said, I already did, twice, and I'd do it 40 more times. Which was not the correct response and made everyone laugh, including my wife, who laughed with her whole body, out loud, in front of people, which 3 years of ice had never once let her do. And I want to tell you the thing that undid me completely. When it was done, when we were married again, Vivienne took something out of her pocket. It was a folded piece of paper, worn soft at the creases. It was her anniversary letter. The real one. The one she'd written 3 years ago, begging me to try. The one Brooke had intercepted and Serena had read and ordered destroyed. The one I had finally read at 2 in the morning in my study with my heart breaking. Brooke had not destroyed it. Brooke, being careful, had kept it. And so it had survived, 3 years, in a folder in a filing cabinet 20 feet from my office, the letter that would have saved us. I want to read it to you, Vivienne said, in the garden, in front of our 11 people. Out loud, the way I should have 3 years ago, instead of leaving it on a desk and hoping. Because I was a coward, and I put it on paper instead of putting it in your hands, and it cost us everything. Her hands were shaking. So I'm going to do the brave version. 3 years late, and my wife stood in her grandmother's garden and read me the letter she had written to a man she was terrified of, a man she was certain despised her, in the 3rd year of a frozen marriage, begging him to try. I will not tell you what it said, that one's mine. But I will tell you that by the end of it, I was weeping so hard I could not stand up straight, and that Vivienne was weeping, and that our 11 guests were weeping, and that when she finished, she folded it up and pressed it into my hand and said, delivered. And I said, received. That letter is framed in our bedroom now, not in the study, not somewhere impressive, in the room where we sleep, where I can see it every night, because it is the single most important document of my life, more important than the will or the merger or the deed to any of it. It is proof that she loved me, in the dark, alone, when she had every reason to believe I hated her, and that she was brave enough to write it down. 3 years it sat in a drawer. It only took 11 days, once we could actually see each other, to deliver it. That's the whole thing, really. That's the whole story, in one letter, sitting 20 feet away in a filing cabinet for 3 years while 2 people froze to death. That was 4 years ago. Let me tell you how it settled, because the fall of Serena Hayes was the plot, but it was never the point. The point is what grows in the ground after you've pulled the poison out of it. The first thing we did, the very first, was tear down the house. Not literally, but close. Because Vivienne said something in the 2nd week of our 2nd marriage that reorganized my entire understanding of what had happened to us. She said, Julian, we keep saying Serena froze us. She didn't. She lit the match. But we built the whole house out of kindling first, and so did our fathers, and so did their fathers. She gestured at the great cold hall of the Thorne mansion. Look at this place. 9 bedrooms, 2 wings, a dining table 40 feet long. This house was designed by people who did not want to be close to each other. My family's house is the same. We were raised in buildings engineered for distance, by families who taught us that showing want is weakness, and then we were married to each other and told to be happy, and when we froze, everyone acted surprised. She looked at me. She could only poison us because we were already sitting 40 feet apart at breakfast pretending that was normal. So I don't want to just remove her. I want to remove the 40 feet. So we sold the Thorne mansion. That is not a small sentence. It had been in my family for 110 years. My father was born in it. Every important thing that ever happened to the Coles happened under that roof, and I sold it, 11 months into my 2nd marriage, and my extended family made a noise about it that I can still hear. We bought a house with 1 kitchen and a table that seats 6. That's it. That's the whole grand gesture. A house where you cannot be 40 feet away from the person you married, where you have to actually walk past each other in a hallway, where there is exactly 1 room where the coffee is in the morning, and if you want coffee, you have to go be in it with your wife. It is the single best financial decision I have ever made, and I have made some very good ones. The Thorne-Dubois merger, incidentally, is fine. Better than fine. It turns out that the merged empire our fathers built for the wrong reasons runs extraordinarily well when the 2 people at the top of it actually talk to each other. We run it together now, openly, as equals, which scandalized the board for about 6 months until the numbers came in. Vivienne is better at capital allocation than I will ever be. I am better at people. For 3 years, we were 2 of the sharpest minds in the city, married, living in the same house, sitting 40 feet apart at breakfast in silence, running the same company, and never once comparing notes. Do you understand how much that cost? Not emotionally, financially. We ran the numbers once, as a joke on a bad night. 3 years of the two of us not talking to each other cost the merged entity, conservatively, several $100 million in decisions we each made badly alone that we would have made well together. Serena Hayes' little project to break our marriage was, purely as a business matter, one of the most expensive acts of sabotage in this city's history, and she did it for free, out of love. Our fathers, I think, would find that funny. Mine would, anyway, in his dry way. He'd have said something like, "Well, son, you always did overpay for things." Because that's the last thing about my father, and I need to say it, because it's part of what the mask taught me. He was not a warm man. He built me the way he was built, which was to be reserved and controlled and never, ever to show a want. And on his deathbed, when he asked me to marry Vivienne, he said one more thing that I did not understand for 3 years. He held my hand, which he had maybe done twice in my adult life, and he said, "Julian, don't be like me about it." That's all. That's the whole sentence. Don't be like me about it. And I nodded, and I thought he meant business. He didn't mean business. He meant the marriage. My father, dying, looking at the son he had accidentally built into a locked door, was trying, in the only vocabulary he had, to tell me not to do to my wife what he had done to my mother. He was trying to warn me, and I didn't hear it, because he said it the way he said everything, which was quietly, once, without explanation, and then he died, and I went off and did exactly the thing he was warning me about, for 3 years, in his house. I think about that more than anything else in this story. He tried. In his broken, frozen, 7-word way, my father tried to save my marriage from his deathbed. And it didn't work, because the warning was delivered in the same language that caused the problem. You cannot warn someone about silence quietly. It doesn't take. So I have made a rule about it. In my house, in my marriage, in my company, nothing important is ever said quietly, once, without explanation. If it matters, I say it out loud, and I say it again, and I check that it landed. My employees find this exhausting. My wife finds it exhausting. I do not care. I watched what quietly, once, without explanation cost my father, and cost my mother, and cost me 3 years and nearly my whole life. I will be exhausting. I will be a fool who asks. I will never again be a dignified man freezing to death across 40 feet of table. I need to go back, though, because I've told you the ending, and I've skipped the middle, and the middle is where the actual love story is, and I am not going to cheat you out of it. I have not told you about the 3 weeks. Between the night of the mask and the night of the trap, there were about 3 weeks where Vivienne and I lived the strangest life 2 people have ever lived. By day, we performed the frozen marriage, because Serena had to believe it. And by night, in secret, in my study, through the servants' passage, we courted each other. Courted. That's the only word for it. We were legally married, we had shared a house for 3 years, and we spent 3 weeks courting each other in the dark like 2 teenagers, because we had never actually done it, and it turned out we both desperately wanted to. I want to tell you about those nights, because they were the best nights of my life, and because they are the actual point of this entire story. The first night, we were so awkward I could have died. 2 of the most formidable people in the city, sitting 6 feet apart in a study at midnight, and neither of us could think of a single thing to say. 3 years of marriage and we had no small talk. We had never learned any. Finally, Vivienne said, "This is absurd. I have negotiated a $200 million acquisition, and I cannot think of one thing to say to my own husband." So I said, "Then let's not do small talk. Let's do the real thing. Ask me anything, anything at all. I'll answer honestly. That's the only rule." And she looked at me for a long moment, and then she said, "What do you actually do all day? I've been married to you for 3 years, and I genuinely do not know what your job is like. I know what your title is. I don't know what your days are." And I laughed, and then I told her, and she asked follow-up questions, real ones, sharp ones, and 2 hours vanished, and that was the first night. My wife asked me what I did all day. That was our first real conversation, 3 years in. The second night, she asked what I was afraid of, and I told her the truth, which was that I was afraid I was not as good at any of this as my father had been, and that everyone would eventually notice. And she went very quiet and then said, "Julian, I have watched you run that company for 3 years. You are significantly better at it than your father was. He was feared. You are followed. Those are not the same thing, and only one of them survives you." And I had to leave the room for a minute because no one had ever said anything like that to me in my life. and she had been living down the hall the whole time, and I had never asked. The third night, I asked what she wanted, and she said, "Nobody's ever asked me that." And then she cried for 20 minutes, and then she told me she'd wanted to be a painter. A painter. My wife. 3 years, and I did not know that the woman I lived with had wanted, more than anything, before duty took her, to paint. She had a whole self in her that had been folded up and put away at 22 so the Dubois empire could have a daughter it could use, and she had never told a living soul because there had never been a soul to tell. She paints now, by the way. That's the epilogue nobody expects. The co-head of one of the largest merged commercial entities in the city gets up at 5 in the morning 3 days a week and paints in a room with bad light and no view because she likes the light in that particular room, and she is not very good yet, and she does not care, and it is my favorite thing about my entire life. There is a canvas in our hallway that is objectively mediocre, and I would run into a burning building for it. That's what the ice cost. Not romance, not sex, not even companionship. It cost us the ordinary daily knowledge of each other. 3 years of not knowing what she wanted to be. 3 years of her not knowing what I was afraid of. Serena didn't steal a marriage from us. She stole 1,000 small pieces of information, and it turns out that a marriage is nothing but a very large pile of small pieces of information about another person, gathered slowly, on purpose, over years. By the 4th night, we couldn't stop. We stayed up until 3, 4 in the morning, every night for 3 weeks, and then dragged ourselves to breakfast and performed the ice for the staff, exhausted and glowing and secretly, insanely happy. I have never been so tired in my life. I have never been so alive. And here's the thing about those 3 weeks that I did not understand until much later. They were, in a strange way, a gift from Serena Hayes. Because we could not touch each other in daylight, we had to talk. We had 3 weeks where the only thing available to us was conversation, in the dark, with nothing else allowed. Most couples get the physical part first and spend 40 years hoping the conversation shows up eventually. We were forced, by the war, to do it backwards. We fell completely, catastrophically in love with each other's minds, in the dark, in whispers, before I was ever allowed to so much as hold her hand in a hallway. I would not recommend the method, but I will tell you that it built something that does not break. The night before we sprang the trap, Vivienne said something I think about constantly. We were exhausted and frightened, and she said, "Julian, if it goes wrong tomorrow, if she wins, if we lose all of it, I want you to know that these 3 weeks were worth 3 years of ice. I would do the 3 years again to get these 3 weeks. That's not a brave thing to say. That's just arithmetic." And that is the truest description of love I have ever heard. Not a feeling. Arithmetic. The math working out in favor of a person so completely that 3 years of suffering price in as reasonable. I have to tell you about Sophia because I have been putting it off, and because she is the reason any of this worked, and because it shames me. Sophia was Vivienne's maid. She had been Vivienne's nurse when Vivienne was a baby, and she had come with her from the Dubois house into our cold marriage, the one piece of her old life Vivienne was allowed to bring. And Sophia spent 3 years watching her girl freeze to death in my house. Here is what shames me. I lived in the same house as Sophia for 3 years. I said good morning to her most days. And when Vivienne told me, in one of those midnight conversations, that Sophia had spent 3 years quietly, invisibly, gathering up every scrap with Vivienne's name on it that she found discarded, I realized I did not know Sophia's last name. 3 years. A woman had been silently trying to save my marriage in the margins of my own house, and I did not know her surname. I know it now. It's Nwabweze. Sophia Nwabweze. I say it out loud sometimes just to make sure I never forget it again. Because it was Sophia who handed us the war. Not my resources, not Vivienne's brilliance. Sophia. A woman with no power at all, who could not have stopped Serena Hayes in any way that mattered, who simply loved her girl and could not bear to see anything with her name on it thrown in a bin. So she saved things. Notes, scraps, and one torn page from Brooke's notebook, retrieved from a wastebasket 2 years before anyone knew it would matter, with a single line on it in Brooke's careful hand. Intercept anniversary letter. Confirm with V. Confirm with V. That torn page was the entire war. Everything after it, the trap, the confession, the ruin of Serena Hayes, all of it grew from a page a maid pulled out of a bin because it had her girl's name on it. And here is what breaks me about it still. Sophia did not know what she had. She did not understand the document. She could not have explained why it mattered. She was not being clever. She was just being loyal, in the only way available to a person with no power, which is to refuse to let the people you love be discarded, even in small ways, even in wastebaskets. The powerful people in this story, and I include myself, spent 3 years being expertly manipulated by a clever woman. The maid, who had no power and no information and no plan, spent those same 3 years accidentally assembling the only evidence that could save us, out of pure love, without knowing it. There is a lesson in that, and it's the same lesson as everything else in this story. Serena Hayes could manipulate everyone who mattered because everyone who mattered was performing. She could not manipulate Sophia because Sophia was not playing. She was just loving someone. And love, stupid, powerless, unstrategic love, turned out to be the only thing in that house that Serena's genius could not corrupt because it wasn't trying to win anything. Sophia lives with us. That is not a figure of speech. She has a room in our small house with the one kitchen, and she is retired, and she is not staff, and she comes to dinner, and my wife checks on her the way you check on a mother. Vivienne tried to give her money, a lot of it, and Sophia refused with such offense that Vivienne never brought it up again. So instead Vivienne bought Sophia's sister a house, which Sophia allowed, because it was for someone else, which tells you everything about Sophia Nwabweze you will ever need to know. Now, the other thing I have been putting off. The second masquerade. The Dubois Masquerade happens every year. It's Vivienne's family's event, the great social pinnacle of the city, 600 masked guests. It happened again, the year after everything, and Vivienne and I had to decide whether to go, because obviously the last one had ended with me pulling a silver mask off my own wife's face while she wept. We went. Of course we went. And Vivienne, who I remind you is the most quietly dangerous person I have ever met, did not tell me what she had planned. I spent that whole evening looking for her. 600 masked guests, and I could not find my wife, and I was, I admit, growing genuinely anxious. And then, near midnight, a woman in a silver mask appeared at my elbow. The same silver mask. The exact one. She'd kept it. And she said, in a voice pitched to be a stranger's, "You look lost, sir." And I understood exactly what she was doing, and my throat closed up. "I'm looking for my wife," I said. "Oh," said the woman in the silver mask. "What's she like?" And so, for the second time in my life, at midnight, at a masquerade, I stood in front of a woman in a silver mask and told her about the woman I loved. Except this time I knew. This time I got to do it on purpose. I told a masked stranger that my wife was the funniest person I'd ever met and that nobody knew it. That she painted badly and beautifully at 5 in the morning. That she'd sat on a floor and laughed until she cried on the worst night of her life. That she had written me a letter 3 years ago that I did not receive and read it out loud to me in a garden, and that I had never in my life seen anything braver. That I had spent 3 years married to her without meeting her, and that finding her had been like a sealed room getting a window. And somewhere in the middle of it, the woman in the silver mask started crying, silently, behind the mask, and I kept going anyway, because I had promised her, on the floor of my father's study, no more silence. Out loud, like an idiot, every time. And then the clock struck midnight, and all around us 600 people laughed and reached up and took off their masks. And I reached out and I lifted the silver mask off my wife's face, and there she was, and down her cheek, catching the light of 10,000 candles, ran a single tear. And this time, I knew exactly who she was. And this time, I did not freeze. I kissed her, in front of 600 people, at midnight, at her family's ball, in the exact spot where a year earlier I had discovered that I had loved my wife for 3 years without ever once seeing her face. She told me later that she had planned it for 11 months, that she had kept the silver mask in a drawer for a year specifically to do that she wanted to take the worst night of our lives and write over it, in the same ballroom, at the same hour, wearing the same mask, so that for the rest of our lives, when either of us thought of that mask, we would think of the second time and not the first. "You can't undo the 3 years," she said, "but you can go back to the room where it happened and put something better in it. That's the only thing anybody can actually do about the past." We go every year now. She wears the silver mask every year. Every year at midnight I find her, and I take it off, and every year she cries, and every year I say the same thing, which is the only vow I have ever meant completely. There you are. I see you. I want to go back and tell you about the 2 days I doubted her, because I skipped past it too quickly, and it is the most important warning in this entire story. When Serena came to me with the lie about Vivienne wanting the company, I have told you that the poison worked for 2 days. What I have not told you is what those 2 days were actually like from the inside, and I need to, because it is the thing that will happen to you, whoever you are, and I want you to recognize it when it comes. It did not feel like being lied to. That's the part people never understand. It felt like waking up. That's the whole trick. A great lie does not feel like a lie. It feels like clarity. It feels like the scales falling off. For 2 days, I walked around with a horrible, sick calm, thinking, of course, of course. How did I not see it? It was all too good. She is brilliant and strategic, and I am a lonely man who wanted to be loved, and she saw that and she used it, and it all fit. It fit so beautifully, and I felt not deceived, but awake. The lie made me feel intelligent. That was its genius. Serena did not attack my love for Vivienne. She attacked my self-respect and offered me a way to protect it. She whispered, "You are being made a fool of, and every man alive would rather be a cynic than a fool." And so I reached for the version of the story where I was too smart to be tricked, and in reaching for it, I became the easiest mark in the city. That is how they get you. Not by making you sad, by making you feel clever. And the thing that saved me was not intelligence. I want to be very clear about that because I am supposed to be the clever one in this story, and my cleverness did nothing at all. My cleverness was the vulnerability. What saved me was a memory of a woman in a mask making me laugh before any of it could possibly have been a trick. That's it. That's the whole defense. One irreducible piece of evidence from before the possibility of deception that no argument could touch. The mask was real. It happened before she knew who I was. Nothing Serena could construct could reach backward and poison it. So here is what I have learned, and it is the only advice I have to give anyone. Keep one thing that cannot be argued with. One memory, one moment, one piece of proof from before there was anything to gain. When someone comes for you with a beautiful, clever, well-fitting story about the person you love, do not fight it with logic, because logic is the ground the liar chose, and they will beat you on it. Go to the thing that happened before. Go to the mask. Vivienne has one too, by the way. I asked her once what hers was, and she said without hesitating, "The old man in the corner." The third dinner. Before we were engaged. Before there was anything to gain. Me, at 29, spending 20 minutes giving dignity back to a senile old man when I thought no one was watching. Whenever she told me "you were cold," Vivienne said, some small part of me would go, "but the old man in the corner," and I could never make it fit. So I decided "you were cold," and also that, and I stopped thinking about it because it hurt too much. But it never went away. She looked at me. That's the thing that survived 3 years of her. 20 minutes in a corner. You have no idea what you were doing. 3 years of expert psychological warfare, and the thing that finally broke it was 2 accidental moments of ordinary decency, witnessed by one person each when neither of us thought anyone was looking. So be decent when nobody's watching. Not for karma, because it turns out to be the only evidence that survives. Now let me tell you the thing you're waiting for, because I know you're waiting for it. Yes, we have a daughter. She is 2. Her name is Charlotte, for Vivienne's grandmother, whose garden we were married in, twice. She has her mother's eyes, and God help us all, her mother's absolutely unreadable face when she wants something, which she deploys at 2 years old with a precision that makes grown adults nervous. And I want to tell you the one thing I have promised her, that I whisper to her sometimes when she's asleep and can't hear me, and I can therefore be embarrassing. I promise her that she will never have to guess. That is the entire inheritance I care about giving her. Not the empire, which she can have or not have, not the money, not the name, just this, that she will never, not one single day of her life, have to sit across a table from someone who loves her and try to work out from their face whether it's true. Because I did that for 32 years, first with my father and then with my wife, and I lost 3 years of my life to it, and I nearly lost all of it, and it is the only thing I am truly afraid of passing down. So we tell her, out loud, constantly, like idiots, every time. My father said, "Don't be like me about it" once, quietly, dying, and I did not hear it. My daughter is going to hear it every single day until she is sick of it. There's a part of this I have avoided, and my wife, reading over my shoulder, has just told me I am doing the exact thing I claim to have stopped doing, which is being dignified instead of honest. So, fine. Here's the ugly part. I was angry at Vivienne, for months, after everything, after the mask and the garden and the trap and the second wedding, somewhere in the first year of our second marriage, I went through a stretch where I was quietly, shamefully furious at my own wife, and it nearly ruined us a second time, and almost nobody tells you about this part. Because here's what happened. Once the euphoria wore off, once we were just 2 people living in a house instead of 2 people winning a war, a small, poisonous voice showed up in me and said, "She threw divorce papers at you. She gave up. She quit on you." 3 years, and she never once asked you either. Serena lied to both of us, fine. But Vivienne is the one who filed. Vivienne is the one who decided. And it was not fair, and it was not rational, and it was true. And all three of those things can be true at once, which is the worst thing about being a person. And the old me, the me from the first marriage, would have said nothing, would have carried it, would have gone quiet and dignified and let it rot in the walls for a decade until it came out sideways as coldness, and Vivienne would have felt the temperature drop and had no idea why, and we would have frozen all over again, without Serena, entirely on our own, which would have been the true tragedy of this story. Instead, I did the thing I promised in the study. I went to her, and I said it out loud, and I looked like an absolute fool. I said, "I'm angry at you, and I think it's unfair, and I can't stop." And then I said the whole ugly thing, the divorce papers, the quitting, all of it. And I watched my wife's face while I said it, and it was the hardest thing I have ever done, harder than the trap, harder than the ball. And Vivienne listened to the entire thing without saying a word. And when I finished, she was quiet for a long time. And then she said the thing that saved my marriage for the second time. She said, "You're right, I did quit. I want you to know that I know that." She was very steady. "I quit because I had spent 3 years being told every morning, by your face, that you found me exhausting. And because at some point a person stops being brave and just starts trying to survive. And filing those papers was the first time in 3 years I had done anything except endure. It felt like standing up. I am not going to apologize for standing up." Her eyes were wet, but her voice was iron. "But I am going to say the other true thing, which is that I quit on you 11 days before you would have found out the truth. 11 days, Julian. I was 11 days from the mask, and I will think about that for the rest of my life." And then she said, "So you're allowed to be angry. Be angry. Just be angry out loud, at me, in this kitchen, where I can answer. That's the deal. Not in the walls. Not in the walls. That's the whole marriage, right there. Not in the walls." We fought about it, on and off for about 4 months. Real fights, loud ones. My family would have been horrified. Vivienne's family would have needed smelling salts. 2 heirs of the great dynasties shouting at each other in a kitchen with a table that seats 6, about a stack of divorce papers, and then eating dinner afterward. It was the healthiest thing that has ever happened to me. Because here is what I learned, and it is the last real thing I have to teach anyone. The masks did not come off in that ballroom. That is a nice story, and it is not true. The masks came off in a kitchen, over 4 months, in ugly increments, while 2 extremely proud people learned, badly and late and with enormous difficulty, how to say "I am hurt" out loud without dying of it. The ballroom was the miracle. The kitchen was the work. And nobody wants to hear about the kitchen. Everybody wants the mask and the clock and the tear on the cheek. And I understand that, I do. It was the most beautiful moment of my life. But the mask only bought us a chance. Everything real that we have was built afterward, badly, in a kitchen, by 2 people who had to learn a language at 32 that most people learn at 6. If you take one thing from this whole story, do not take the mask. Take the kitchen. Because you probably do not have a Serena Hayes. Most people don't. Most frozen marriages do not have a villain in them at all, and I think that's what makes ours almost a comfort in a strange way. We got to have someone to blame. We got to have a monster and destroy her and feel the satisfaction of it. Most people don't get that. Most people just have the silence. 2 people who love each other, sitting 40 feet apart, each waiting for the other to speak first, for 30 years, and no villain anywhere, nobody to ruin, nobody to expose in a study at midnight with a recorder running. Just 2 frightened, dignified people, freezing, politely, forever. That's the real horror story. Ours had a witch in it. That made it easy. Yours probably doesn't, and that makes it harder, and I am sorry. But the cure is the same either way, and it isn't a mask, and it isn't trap, and it isn't a clever war. It's saying the thing out loud, today, like a fool. I said I would tell you what happened to Serena Hayes, and I have told you the public version, and now I am going to tell you the private one, because there is one more scene, and it is the scene I have thought about most often in 4 years, and I still do not entirely know what to do with it. She wrote to me, 2 years after the study, not an email, a letter, handwritten, on ordinary paper, no monogram, because there was no Hayes monogram anymore. It came to the office. Brooks' replacement brought it in, and I looked at the handwriting on the envelope, and I felt my whole body go cold, the way you do when you see the handwriting of someone you have buried. I did not open it for 9 days. I put it in a drawer, and every day I went to work and I knew it was in the drawer, and on the 9th day I told my wife about it, because that is now the rule, out loud, like a fool, every time. Vivienne said, "Do you want to open it?" And I said, "No." And she said, "Then don't. But if you leave it in the drawer, it'll be in the drawer for 30 years. She thought about it. "Open it with me. If it's poison, it can't work on two people at once. That's the only thing we ever learned that was worth anything." So we opened it together, at the small table that seats 6, in the house with one kitchen. It was 4 lines long. It said, "Julian, I am not going to apologize because an apology implies I could have done otherwise, and I could not. I loved you for 25 years, and it made me a monster, and I would like to tell you that I regret it, and I don't. I only regret losing. That is what I actually am. I thought you should know that at least one person in your life has told you the exact truth about themselves. V." That's it. That's the whole letter. And I want to tell you that I felt triumph or closure or pity, and the truth is, I felt none of those things. I sat at my kitchen table, and I felt sick. Because she was right. It was the truest thing anyone had ever written to me. She did not lie in that letter, not once, not even a little. The woman who built a 3-year architecture of lies around my entire life wrote me 4 lines of perfect, undefended honesty, and it was the only completely honest communication I ever received from her, and it arrived 2 years too late, from a woman with nothing left to gain by lying. Do you see it? Do you see what that means? She could only tell the truth once she had nothing to protect. That's it. That's the mechanism. That's the whole disease. And it isn't Serena's disease. It's mine. It's my father's. It's Vivienne's. It's everyone in this story. Every single person in this house lied. By silence, by coldness, by omission, by mask. Because they had something to protect. And every single one of them told the truth only at the exact moment they had already lost everything. Vivienne told the truth in a garden after she had already filed for divorce when she thought it was over. I told the truth on the floor of my father's study after I had already lost her. Serena told the truth in 4 lines after she had been ruined. My father told the truth in 7 words while dying. 4 people, and not one of us could open our mouths until we had nothing left to lose. That's the thing. That's the actual villain of this story, and it isn't Serena Hayes. It's the arithmetic of having something to protect. As long as you have something to lose, you will armor up, and the armor will be reasonable, and the armor will kill you slowly, and you will only take it off in the wreckage, standing in the ruins, saying the true thing at last to a person who is already walking away. Serena Hayes' 4 lines are the most important document in my life, not because of what she said, because of when she was able to say it. Vivienne read it 3 times, then she folded it and she said, "Burn it or frame it?" And I said, "Neither." And I put it in a box in the attic, and it is still there, and I have never read it again, and I have never once forgotten a word of it. I don't hate her. I want to be careful here because people expect me to, and there is a version of this story where I stand up and say, "I have forgiven Serena Hayes," and it is a lie, and I have promised you no more lies. I have not forgiven her. I am not going to. She took 3 years, and she would have taken 40, and there is no version of me that shakes her hand. But I do not hate her either, and I'll tell you why, and it's not because I'm a good man. It's because hate is a thing you carry, and I have carried enough for one life. And I watched what carrying did to my father, and I am not going to spend 1 more ounce of the 40 years I have left on a woman who already lost everything she had. She is not in my house. She does not get a room in my head. That is not forgiveness. That is eviction, and it is the healthiest thing I have ever done. She's in Portugal, I believe. Or she was. Someone told me once, at a party, in the way people do, and I remember noticing, with something like wonder, that I did not particularly want to know more. That's how you know it's over. Not when you forgive them, when you stop being curious. Now, Brooke. I have been dreading this one because Brooke is the part of the story where I do not come out looking good, and where the moral is uncomfortable, and where I made a decision that a lot of people still tell me was wrong. Brooke Fields was my assistant for 6 years. She sat outside my office. She knew my schedule, my coffee, my father's condition, the name of every person I dreaded meeting. She was, functionally, the person I spent the most waking hours with on Earth, and she spent 3 of those 6 years feeding Serena Hayes every single detail of my marriage and intercepting my wife's letters out of the mail, including the anniversary letter. I want you to sit with that. The most important document in my life, the letter my wife wrote me on our first anniversary, the one that would have ended all of it before it began, was taken out of a stack of mail, 4 feet from my office door, by a woman who said good morning to me every day for 6 years, and put into an envelope for Serena. And here's the thing that gutted me. When we finally had her in a room, when we had the torn page and the immunity offer on the table, and she broke and told us everything. She wasn't paid. Serena Hayes never gave Brooke Fields a single dollar. There was no bribe, there was no leverage, there was no blackmail. I had assumed, for the entire war, that we would find a payment trail, because that is how my brain works. And there was nothing. And when we asked her why, Brooke looked at us like we were stupid and said, "Because she talked to me." That's it. That's the price. Serena Hayes bought my entire marriage for the cost of conversation. Brooke said, and I will remember this until I die, "In 6 years, Mr. Thorne, you asked me one question about myself. One. You asked whether my mother's operation had gone well, and you asked it because it was on your calendar that I'd taken the day off. Ms. Hayes used to sit on my desk for 20 minutes and ask about my sister. She remembered my sister's name. She remembered my sister's boyfriend's name." Brooke's face was terrible. I knew it was wrong. I knew exactly what I was doing. I'm not going to pretend. But I want you to understand that when she asked me for something, she was the only person in that building who had ever treated me like a person. And I said yes, and I would like to tell you I did it for money, because that would be less humiliating for both of us. So there it is. I lost 3 years of my marriage, and nearly my entire life, because I never asked my assistant about her sister. And you can say, correctly, that Brooke's choice was Brooke's, that plenty of lonely people don't betray their employers, that the fault is hers. All true. I've told myself all of it. But I have to live with the other thing, which is that Serena Hayes found the crack in my house, and the crack was that I did not see the people who were closest to me. She didn't hack anything. She didn't bribe anyone. She just noticed the person I had rendered invisible and gave her 20 minutes a week, and that was enough to take everything I had. I did not see Sophia's last name. I did not see Brooke's sister. 2 invisible women, one who saved me and one who destroyed me, and I had made them both invisible by the exact same mechanism, and I got extraordinarily lucky in which way it broke. I have thought about that at 3 in the morning more times than I can count. So, what did I do about Brooke? I gave her immunity. Full immunity, a clean reference, and no prosecution. She never spent an hour in a courtroom. She testified in the deposition that destroyed Serena Hayes, and then she walked out of my life, and she works somewhere else now, and she is fine. My lawyers hated it. Half my board thought I'd lost my mind. There was a real, legitimate argument that she should be ruined, that what she did was arguably criminal, that letting her walk sent a signal to every employee in the building that you could sell out the chairman and get a reference. Vivienne made the call, actually, not me. I want that on the record because it's the single most Vivienne thing that has ever happened. She said, "Julian, if you destroy Brooke Fields, you will feel wonderful for about a week, and then you will be a man who destroyed a lonely woman for being lonely. And you will have to be that man for the rest of your life, in our kitchen, at our table, in front of our children. Serena cost us 3 years. Do not let her cost us who you are on the way out." And then she said the thing that ended the discussion. Also, she's the witness. If we ruin her, she's a bitter ex-employee with a grudge and a jury will hear it. If we protect her, she's a woman telling the truth at cost to herself. Mercy is also, in this specific case, the winning legal strategy, which is very convenient because I would have argued for it anyway. That's my wife. Merciful and lethal in the same sentence, and genuinely unable to tell you which one came first. But here's the part I actually did. Before Brooke walked out for the last time, I asked her to sit down, and I said, "Brooke, what's your sister's name?" And she went white, and she said, "Don't." And I said, "I'm not doing it to be cruel. I'm asking because I should have asked 6 years ago, and I'm going to ask now, once, and then you'll never see me again, and I want to know." And she stood in the doorway for a long moment, and she said, "Isabelle." And then she said, "She died. 14 months ago." And then she left. 14 months ago. Her sister died 14 months ago, 4 feet from my office door, and I did not know, and Serena Hayes almost certainly did. I have a rule now, and my executives find it deeply strange, and I don't care. Every person who reports to me, I know one true thing about their life that is not on a calendar. Not as a management technique. I have read the books. I know they call it engagement. That is not what this is. I do it because a woman I saw every day for 6 years lost her sister, and I did not notice. And because loneliness inside my own building is not a soft problem, it is a security vulnerability, and it cost me 3 years of my marriage, and I will never leave that door open again. I want to tell you about the divorce papers, because I have said, in the shorthand way you say things, that the divorce got torn up, and that is not what happened, and the truth is better. We did not tear them up. Vivienne keeps them. They are in a drawer in our house, the actual physical stack, with her signature on the last page and the blank space where mine never went. 4 years later. She will not throw them away, and she will not let me throw them away. I asked her why, once, early on, when it still hurt to look at them, and she said, "Because I want to remember that I was capable of it." I didn't understand, and she said, "Julian, everybody in this story wants to believe that our love was always going to survive, that it was fated, that the mask was destiny." She shook her head. "It wasn't. I signed those. I meant it. I was 11 days from being gone forever, and if I had left 11 days earlier, or if the ball had been in June instead of May, we would never have found out, and I would be 45 and living somewhere else, and I would think of you as the cold man I was married to once, for 3 years, and I would never have known. Never. Not for 1 second of my whole life." She put her hand flat on the drawer. "That's not destiny. That's a coin landing on its edge. And I keep them because the day I start thinking we were always going to be fine is the day I start getting careless. So they stay in the drawer. And I want to say something about that because it is, I think, the last true thing I have. Everybody wants this story to be a fairy tale. I understand why. It has the ingredients. A ball, a mask, a clock striking midnight, a man who does not recognize the woman he loves, a tear on a cheek. It is, structurally, Cinderella, and people want to hear it that way, and when I tell it at dinner parties, I can watch people's faces go soft in the exact place where the mask comes off. And I know what they are thinking. They are thinking, destiny. They are thinking, some things are meant to be. It was not meant to be. It was luck. It was blind, stupid, unearned luck, and it was 11 days wide. If Vivienne had been braver 11 days earlier, we'd be strangers. If her hand had not shaken pouring the champagne, I would never have looked twice at the woman in the silver mask. If Sophia Nwabweze had emptied a wastebasket without looking, Serena Hayes would be at our table at Christmas right now, and I would think of her as my oldest friend. If my father had died in November instead of March, there is no marriage at all. If. I am the beneficiary of a coin that landed on its edge, and I have spent 4 years trying to figure out what to do with that, and here is the only answer I've found. You cannot count on the mask. That's it. That's what I'd tell you. If you were sitting across from me at the small table in the house with one kitchen, and you told me that things had gone quiet with someone you love, and that you were waiting, and that you were sure that eventually they'd say something, that eventually it would resolve, that eventually you'd find your way back. There is no ball. Nobody's coming to your house with a silver mask and a clock striking midnight. The universe is not preparing a reveal for you. That happened to me, once by accident, and it is the single luckiest thing that has ever happened to a human being, and I would not bet 1 day of your life on it happening to you. What you have instead is a kitchen, and a person in it, and a sentence you have been not saying for a very long time. So go say it. Badly. Right now. While it's still 11 days early instead of 11 days late. That's the whole thing. That's the only thing I know that's worth anything, and it took me a masquerade ball, a destroyed woman, a torn page from a wastebasket, 3 years of my life, and the near total loss of the only person I have ever loved, to learn a lesson that any reasonable person could have simply told me when I was 22. Say the thing out loud. Today. Like a fool. Let me tell you about the board meeting. Because people always ask what the fallout was, professionally, and the answer is, it was a bloodbath, and it was. The most instructive week of my career. 4 days after the study, we called an emergency session of the merged board. 19 people around a table. And I stood up and told them, in plain language, that the chief strategy officer of Hayes Holdings, our second largest partner, had spent 3 years running an intelligence operation against the personal lives of both co-principals, that my assistant had been her asset, and that I had been comprehensively played for 3 years by a woman I trusted more than anyone alive. You have to understand what that meant. I was not reporting a crime. I was reporting my own catastrophic failure of judgment, out loud, to the 19 people whose entire job is to decide whether I am fit to run their money. My general counsel begged me not to do it that way. He had a version, a beautiful version. Contract irregularities, competitive intelligence. 15 minutes, all true. None of it containing the sentence, I was manipulated for 3 years and did not notice. And I stood in the hallway holding his version, and I thought about a man dying in a bed saying, "Don't be like me about it." And I put it in my pocket, and I walked in and told them the truth. It was the worst 40 minutes of my professional life. Arthur Shaw, who had known my father for 30 years, took his glasses off and said, "Julian, are you telling this board that you did not notice?" And I said, "Yes, Arthur, that's exactly what I'm telling you." And the silence in that room had weight. 3 directors moved for my removal, openly, in the room. And they were not wrong to, and I want to say that clearly, because it would be easy to paint them as villains, and they weren't. If the chairman of a company can be run as an asset for 3 years by a rival's officer, that is a legitimate question about the chairman. And then Vivienne stood up. And my wife, who had every reason to let me twist, who had been the other victim, who could have kept her hands clean and consolidated the entire merged entity under Dubois' control in about 9 minutes flat, and every person in that room knew it. My wife stood up and said this: "Before you vote, I want to be certain you're voting on the right question. Because the question on the table appears to be, is Julian Thorne fit to lead, given that he was deceived? That's not the question." She looked around the table, unhurried. I was deceived by exactly the same woman, at the same time, with the same techniques, and I am, by any measure, the better strategist in this room, present company very much included. She ran me too. So if being deceived by Serena Hayes disqualifies a person from leadership, this board has 2 vacancies to fill, not 1. And I'd invite anyone who thinks they'd have caught it to say so out loud, right now, and I'll remember they said it. Nobody said a word. "The actual question," she said, "is what a leader does in the 4 days after they find out." Julian had a version of this speech that would have protected him completely and told you almost nothing. I read it. It was excellent. "He's got it in his pocket." She turned and looked at me. "He didn't give it. He walked in here and handed you the rope. On purpose. Because he decided that this institution had been run on managed impressions for 110 years and that it nearly cost him everything." Back to the room. "That's the man you're voting on, not the one who got fooled, the one who told you he got fooled, when he had a beautiful alternative in his jacket. I know which of those 2 men I want holding my family's money, and I'd remind you all that I have rather more of it in this thing than any of you." The vote was 17-2. Arthur Shaw found me afterward in the hallway. Old man, my father's friend, hadn't said a warm word to me in my life. He said, "Your father would never have done what you just did in there." And I said, "I know, Arthur." And he stood there for a second, and then he said, "Good." And then he said, "He was my closest friend for 31 years, Julian, and I never once knew a single true thing about him. I went to his funeral, and I realized I'd spent 3 decades with a man I'd never met." He put his glasses back on. "Don't do that to the people who like you. It's a hell of a thing to find out at a graveside." Arthur Shaw. 79 years old, standing in a hallway telling me that my father's greatest achievement was that 31 years of friendship left no evidence. That's the disease. It isn't marriages, it's everything. It's every relationship those men had, all of it, run on managed silence. And at the end of it, a room full of people who liked you very much and never met you. I want to go back to my mother now, because Arthur opened that door and I have never walked through it in this whole account, and it is the missing wall of the house. My mother's name was Evelyn. She died when I was 19, and for most of my life I thought of her the way you think of weather, a condition of the house rather than a person in it. Quiet, beautiful in photographs, present at things. Never in my memory the author of a single sentence I can quote. That's what I had of my mother. 19 years and not one quotable sentence. After the study, after everything, I went looking. I don't fully know why. I think because Vivienne's grandmother's garden had made me realize that other families have artifacts, and I had none, and I wanted to know if there was anything of Evelyn Thorne anywhere in 110 years of Thorne paper. There was a box. In storage. Nobody had opened it since 1998. Letters. Hers. Not sent, that's the part. Written to my father and never sent. Dozens of them, spanning 22 years of marriage, in her handwriting, folded, kept, never mailed. She lived in the same house as him. She could have walked 20 feet down the hall and handed him any one of them. She wrote them instead, and folded them, and put them in a box, for 22 years, and then died. I read them all in one night, on the floor of a storage unit. I did not tell my wife where I was, which is the only time I have broken the rule since the study, and Vivienne has forgiven me for it, and I have not forgiven myself, because it is the exact disease, and I had it as recently as 4 years ago. They were love letters, all of them. 22 years of love letters to a man who was in the next room that she never gave him. And in one of them, dated when I was 6, she wrote, "Julian asked me today if you were angry with him. He is 6. He has already learned to read you for weather. I told him no, of course not. Your father loves you very much. And he said, why doesn't he say it? And I did not have an answer, my love, because I have been waiting 11 years for the same thing, and I have never asked you either. We are teaching him. I can see us teaching him. Please say something to him. Please say something to me." She never mailed it. I sat on the floor of a storage unit at 41 years old and read my mother, at 30-something, watching herself teach me the disease in real time, diagnosing it perfectly, writing it down, and then folding it up and putting it in a box. She knew. That's the thing that took the air out of me. She knew exactly what was happening, and she had the words. She had them. They were right there in her hand, and she still could not open her mouth. Because he had something to protect, and so did she, and the arithmetic held, and it held for 22 years, and then she died, and it kept holding, from inside a box, for another 22. 3 generations of my family froze to death in a warm house, and here is what I did with them, and it's the last thing I have to tell you about my father. There's a stone. Family plot. Both of them, side by side, because of course they are. They are dead, and they are still 4 feet apart and still not saying anything. I took one. Letter. Not all of them, just the one about me at 6, and I read it out loud at his grave. In the rain, because it was raining, and because apparently my life is written by someone with no restraint whatsoever. I read my mother's letter to my dead father out loud in a cemetery, 43 years late, because she couldn't, and because somebody in this family was finally going to say the thing out loud, even if the intended recipient had been in the ground for a decade and the sender for 25 years. It did not fix anything. Nothing was fixed. He's dead. She's dead. Nobody heard it but me and a groundskeeper who very politely pretended to be doing something else. But I want to tell you what it was for, because I've had 4 years to work it out, and it wasn't for them. It was so that it would have been said. Once, out loud, in the air, where it could be heard, instead of folded in a box. 43 years late, by the wrong person, to nobody. That's all a person can do about the past. Vivienne told me that in a ballroom, wearing a silver mask, you can't undo it, but you can go back to the room where it happened and put something better in it. So I went back to the room. The room was a graveyard, and I put my mother's voice in it. Her letters are in our house now. Not framed, that would be obscene. She never meant them to be read. But they're in our house, in a drawer, next to the divorce papers, which I think is the most honest filing system anyone has ever devised. 2 stacks of paper. One is a woman who never said it. One is a woman who almost didn't. 11 days on one side, 22 years on the other. That's the whole distance. That's what the coin was flipping for. Now let me tell you what actually happened in that ballroom, in slow motion, because I have told it fast, and I have told it as a legend, and I have never once told it the way it actually was, which is much stranger, and much smaller, and much better. I did not want to go to the Dubois masquerade. I want to establish that. I went because it was my wife's family's event, and my absence would have been a headline, and I intended to stand near a wall for 90 minutes and leave. Vivienne and I had arrived in separate cars. That is not a detail I am proud of. Separate cars, to her own family's ball, in the 3rd year, 11 days after she signed papers I did not know existed. 600 people in masks, and a woman with a tray of champagne, except she was not a server, she was a guest. She had picked the tray up off a table because she needed something to do with her hands, and I did not know that, and I thought she was staff. I want that on the record too. I have never told anyone that. For the first 90 seconds of the most important conversation of my life, I believed I was speaking to a waitress, and I spoke to her anyway, at length, with interest, because I was miserable and she was the only person in that room not performing, and her hand shook. That's it. That's the whole hinge of my life, a hand shaking on a champagne flute. Because I noticed it, and I said, without thinking, it's all right, they're all terrified too, every single one of them. That's what the masks are for. And the woman in the silver mask went absolutely still. I did not understand why. I thought I had embarrassed her. I know now what happened in that half-second, because she told me, in a garden, later. She told me that her husband, who had not said one kind, unnecessary thing to her in 3 years, had just said the kindest, unnecessary thing anyone had ever said to her, to a stranger, for free, because he thought she was a servant. She told me she nearly took the mask off right then. Nearly. And then she thought, he's being kind to a stranger. He is capable of this. He just isn't capable of it with me. And she said that was the worst thought she has ever had in her life, and she decided, standing there, to have 1 hour of it anyway. 1 hour of her husband, as a stranger, being kind to her. She decided to steal 1 hour from her own marriage before she left it. That's what that night was. My wife shoplifting an hour of her own husband. And I talked to her for 3 hours. I have gone over it 1,000 times, and I cannot find the moment I stopped being polite and started being alive, because there wasn't one. It was just gradual and total. She was funny. God, she was funny. Vicious, quick, unimpressed, and she did not want anything from me, because she could not want anything from me. She was a mask. And so I said things I had not said in years. I told a stranger in a mask that I was lonely. I told her that I ran a large company and that nobody in it had asked me a real question in 4 years. I told her my house was cold. I told the woman I was married to that my house was cold. She said, "Why don't you tell your wife?" Because of course she did. Because she is the bravest person I have ever met, and she asked me directly, standing there, wearing a mask, with her hands shaking. And I said, and this sentence is going to be on my headstone, I have made arrangements. I said, she wouldn't want to hear it. That's it. That's the whole tragedy of 3 years, in 6 words, said by a fool to his own wife's face, at a ball, at 11 at night. She didn't answer for a long moment. And then she said, quietly, "How do you know?" And I said, "I've never asked." And the woman in the silver mask laughed. It was not a nice laugh. It was the laugh of someone finding out something horrific and hilarious at the same time. And she said, "You're an idiot." And I said, "Yes." And that was the moment. Not the unmasking. That. 2 people, both wearing masks, both lying to each other about who they were, having the single most honest conversation of their entire marriage because the masks had made it safe. That's the joke, isn't it? That's the terrible, beautiful joke at the center of my life. We could only be honest with each other while hiding our faces. We had to become strangers to become intimate. 3 years of unlimited access, adjoining bedrooms, shared surname, and the only way we could reach each other was to put on masks and pretend we had never met. Because the thing we could not survive was not exposure, it was recognition. She could hear, "My house is cold," from a stranger. She could not have heard it from her husband, because from her husband, it was a verdict. And I could say it to a woman with no face, because a woman with no face cannot pity me, and cannot leave me, and cannot use it. The mask was not a disguise. The mask was permission. And that's why I keep the story straight, and why it matters, and why I get annoyed when people call it a fairy tale. Because in the fairy tale, the mask is the obstacle, and love conquers it. And in my life, the mask was the only reason love got a word in edgeways. It was the last resort of 2 people who had made honesty impossible everywhere else in a 9-bedroom house. Which is another way of saying, if you find yourself only able to be honest with strangers, on planes, in bars, in the dark, to people who will never see you again, and never with a person sleeping 4 feet away from you, if you are not a private person, you're in trouble. And you've got maybe 11 days. And then there was the hour after. Because the clock struck midnight and 600 people took off their masks, and I reached out and took off hers, and it was my wife, and I have described that moment as the tear on the cheek and the 10,000 candles and all of it, and every word of that is true, and what I have never told you is what I did next. I ran. That's right. That is what the great Julian Thorne did in the most important 30 seconds of his life. I stood there for approximately 4 seconds, looking at my wife's face, with my hand still holding a silver mask, and then I turned around and I walked out of that ballroom at speed, and I got in my car and I drove home, and I sat in my father's study in the dark and I shook. I have let people believe there was a kiss. There was no kiss. There was a man discovering that he had spent 3 hours telling a stranger his house was cold and the stranger was his wife, and that man's entire nervous system executed a full shutdown and he fled. I need you to understand the horror of it, because everyone romanticizes this moment and nobody sits inside it. In 4 seconds I understood. She heard me say she wouldn't want to hear it. She heard me say I never asked. She was standing there the entire time knowing exactly who I was, and she let me talk, and she asked me why I don't tell my wife, and I said she wouldn't want to hear it, and she said, "How do you know?" And I said, "I've never asked," and she laughed and called me an idiot. She wasn't flirting with a stranger. She was conducting an autopsy. On us. With me holding the other end of the scalpel and thinking it was a party. So no, there was no kiss. There was a man who realized, in a single instant, that he was the punchline of his own marriage, and who did the thing he was raised to do, which was to remove himself before anyone could see his face. I sat in that study for 6 hours, and around 5 in the morning, Vivienne came in, still in the gown, having driven herself home, and she stood in the doorway and she said, "You left." And I said, "Yes." And she said, "You always leave." And then, "That's not a metaphor, Julian. You physically leave rooms. You've done it for 3 years. You did it at my mother's funeral. You did it at the New Year's thing. Do you know what it's like? You look at me, and something happens in your face, and then you leave the room. Do you know what a person concludes from that?" And I said, that she's unwanted. And she said, yes. And I said the truest thing I have ever said, and it broke something in me to say it, and it is the reason there is anything left of my life. I said, I leave because I don't know what to do with my face. That's it. That's what 110 years of thorn men amounts to. A man who leaves rooms because he was never taught what to do with his own face when it's full, and so his wife spent 3 years reading the exit as a verdict. Vivienne stood in that doorway and she started to cry, and she said, 3 years. 3 years I have been reading you leaving as a sentence, and it was, and she couldn't finish, and I said, it was fear, and she said, it was fear. And then neither of us said anything at all for about a minute. In the dark, in my father's study, in the house where he had done the identical thing to my mother for 22 years. And then she said, I filed for divorce 11 days ago. That's when I found out. Not before the ball. After. 5 in the morning, in the study, after the mask, after everything. She told me herself, out loud, when she could have let me find out from a process server, because she had decided in that ballroom that she was never going to let anything important be found out sideways again. That's the bravest thing anyone has ever done in my presence. Bravest. She had every reason to say nothing. She had just watched me flee a room. She had no idea whether I would use it. She told me anyway, immediately, at cost, because that's who she actually is under 25 years of training. And I said, I know. And she said, how? And I said, I don't. I know now, and then I laughed, this awful cracked thing, and I said, of course you did. Of course you did. I would have. And she sat down on the floor. That's where the floor comes in. Everyone in this story keeps ending up on the floor. 2 people worth several $billion sitting on the floor of a dead man's study at 5 in the morning in evening wear, because there are things you cannot say in a chair. So that's the real story. The mask came off at midnight, and the man ran away, and the marriage was actually saved at 5 in the morning on a floor by a woman who told the truth when it cost her everything and had no upside whatsoever. Not Cinderella. Nobody's shoe fit. A man fled, and a woman followed him home and made him say it. She always says the story should be called what she calls it, which is, the time I chased my own husband across a city to make him admit he was scared. She's not wrong. It's just longer than the other one. There's one thing left that I've never said to anyone except my wife, and I'm going to say it here because I've come this far and it would be cowardice to stop now. I understand Serena Hayes, not sympathize, understand. There is a difference, and I am going to hold on to it very tightly for the next few minutes. Because here's what nobody wants to look at. Serena Hayes loved me for 25 years and never said it. 25 years. She sat next to me at school. She was at every birthday. She was the person I called when my father died. She was in my house, at my table, at my wedding for 25 years, and she was in love with me for all of it. And she never once opened her mouth and said the words. Do you see it? She is my mother. She is my father. She is me. She is the exact same disease in its terminal stage. Everyone in this story loves somebody and couldn't say it. My mother wrote it in letters and put them in a box. My father compressed it into 7 words on a deathbed. I froze my wife out for 3 years. Vivienne signed papers instead of asking a question. And Serena did the same thing for 25 years. And the pressure had to go somewhere. And because she was brilliant, and because she was never going to say a word out loud, it went sideways. And it came out as architecture. She built a 3-year machine out of an unspoken sentence. That is what an unsaid thing does when it is kept for 25 years by someone with enough talent. It doesn't evaporate, it becomes engineering. If she had said it, if at 22 or 26, or at any point in a quarter century, Serena Hayes had said, Julian, I'm in love with you, I would have said no. I want to be clear, the answer was always going to be no. I never felt it, not once, not for a second. And she would have been devastated, and she would have hated me for a year, and then she would have gotten over it, the way approximately every human being who has ever lived gets over it, and she would still have her company and her name and her life and her 30 years, and she'd be at a party somewhere tonight instead of in Portugal with nothing. One sentence. One humiliating, terrible, ordinary sentence said out loud once at 22, and none of this happens. No stolen letter, no 3 years, no divorce papers in a drawer, no ruined woman. She lost everything she had rather than risk being told no. And I cannot judge that. I have tried, and I can't. Because I am the man who did not tell his own wife his house was cold for 3 years for exactly the same reason. I risked less, and I lost less, and that's the only difference between us. It's a difference of degree, not of kind. That's the thing that keeps me up. Not that she was a monster, that she was me with the volume up. Vivienne says I take this too far. She says there's a line, and the line is real, and it's the letter. She says, Julian, everyone in this story failed to say something. Only one of us reached into another person's mail. Loving in silence is a tragedy. Stealing someone else's words so they can't be heard either is a crime. Don't collapse those. You didn't do what she did. Neither did your mother. Neither did I. And she's right. She's right, and I say it back to myself when I need it. My mother folded her letters and put them in a box. Serena took my wife's letter out of an envelope and put it in Serena's box. Same paper, completely different act. One is a woman drowning quietly. The other is a woman holding someone's head under. But I still think the disease is the same disease. And I think that's the most frightening thing I know. That the exact same silence that made my mother pitiable made Serena Hayes dangerous. And the only variable was talent. So when people ask me, and they do ask, at dinners, when they've had enough wine and they get to the part where they want the moral, when they ask, what was Serena Hayes' mistake? They always expect me to say the letter, or Brooke, or getting caught. It wasn't. Her mistake was made 25 years earlier, at 19, in a school corridor, when a girl decided that not being told no was worth more than a life. Everything after that was just interest accruing on the debt. And so look, here it is. Here's the actual thing this entire story is about, and it took me 160,000 characters to reach it, and I'm sorry, but I had to walk you past every single body first for you to believe me. There is one sentence in your life you're not saying. You know the one. It arrived when I said it. You've got it right now. And you have constructed, around not saying it, an entire architecture. Reasons, timing, dignity, the assumption that they already know, the assumption that they wouldn't want to hear it, the certainty that there will be a better moment. And the architecture is elegant, and it is reasonable, and everyone will agree with you about it, and it is going to cost you everything. My mother built that architecture, and it cost her 22 years and a marriage. My father built it, and it cost him a son who didn't know him, and a friend of 31 years who met him at the graveside. Serena built it, and it cost her a life. I built it, and it cost me 3 years, and would have cost me everything, and did not, by 11 days, by a shaking hand, by a maid with a wastebasket, by a coin landing on its edge. 4 people. Same sentence unsaid. 4 different prices, and only one of them got a discount, and it wasn't because he deserved it. Say the sentence. You will look like an idiot. You will not be dignified. Your voice will do the thing. You will be, for approximately 11 seconds, the least composed you have ever been in your life. And then it will be out. In the air. Where it can be heard. That's all. That's the entire thing. That's what a masquerade ball, a silver mask, a ruined woman, a stolen letter, and 3 years of silence taught a man who was too clever to learn it any other way. People ask me what I would say to her. To the woman in the silver mask, if I could go back to that ballroom and stand in front of her at 11 at night, before midnight, before the clock, knowing everything I know now. And for a long time I had a clever answer for that, because I have a clever answer for everything. And mine was, I'd tell her I knew. I'd say, hello, Vivienne, and I'd watch her face come apart, and we'd skip the whole thing. We'd skip the running and the study and the floor and the 3 weeks and the war. I don't think that anymore. Because I've worked out that if I'd said, hello, Vivienne, at 11 o'clock, the mask goes back on. Immediately. Instantly. The second she is recognized, she is my wife again, and my wife has 3 years of armor, and she would have said something gracious and gone to find her coat, and I would have gone back to standing near a wall, and 11 days later a process server would have found me at the office. Recognition would have killed it. It nearly did anyway. So no, I wouldn't say a word. I'd let it happen exactly as it happened, every horrible second of it. The ignorance, the 3 hours, the 6 words, the fleeing, all of it. Because that was the only door, and it only opened because neither of us knew we were walking through it. The only thing I would change is one thing, and it's not in the ballroom. I'd go back 4 years earlier, to the 3rd dinner, to the night with the old man in the corner, the night before there was anything to gain, when a woman I barely knew watched me be kind to a stranger and decided something about me that she then spent 3 years being talked out of. And I'd find her afterward in the car on the way home, and I'd say the thing I actually thought that night and did not say because I was 29 and composed, and there was going to be a better moment. I thought, I like her. I thought, I could actually be happy. I thought, don't get ahead of yourself. That's it. That's the whole hinge. A man at 29 thinking, I like her, and adding, don't get ahead of yourself, and the sentence goes in the box, and the box goes in the attic, and a woman spends 3 years across 40 feet of table wondering whether her husband can stand the sight of her. One sentence, in a car, in 2019. I like you, this is going better than I expected. I'm frightened of how much I want this to work. Say that, in the car, at 29, and Serena Hayes has nothing to build on. Nothing. Her entire 3-year architecture rested on a single load-bearing assumption, which was that neither of us would ever check. She never had to make Vivienne believe I was cold, I did that. She just had to make sure nobody said anything out loud, and we were going to do that for free. We'd been trained from birth to do it for free. She barely had to lift a finger. She didn't defeat 2 of the sharpest people in the city. She just found 2 people who had already agreed to say nothing, and she made sure it stayed that way. That's the whole crime. That's all it was. She was a woman standing between 2 people who weren't talking, and all she had to do was not move. There's one more scene. I've been saving it, and I'm going to give it to you now, and then I'll stop. 3 months ago, my daughter learned the word why. Every parent gets warned about this. Nobody warns you what it does to a man like me. Because Charlotte is 2, and she asks why about everything, relentlessly, without mercy, and she does not accept a quiet answer given once without explanation. She will not let you be dignified. She will not let you say, because, and walk away. She asks, and when you deflect, she just asks again, and she is completely, magnificently immune to the technique that 4 generations of thorn men have used to run their entire emotional lives. And a few weeks ago, she found the letter. Not the real one, the framed one. The anniversary letter hangs in our bedroom, in a frame, the pages Vivienne read to me in the garden, in her handwriting, behind glass. Everyone who comes to our house asks about it, and I never explain it, which my wife says is the last surviving piece of my father and me, and which she says with an amount of affection I do not deserve. Charlotte pointed at it, and she said, "Why?" And I stood there, holding my daughter, in front of a framed letter that a woman wrote to me before I knew her, that was stolen out of my mail by a lonely assistant, that I did not read for 3 years, that was read to me out loud in a garden by a woman who had already filed to leave me, and my 2-year-old asked me why it was on the wall. And I opened my mouth to say, "It's from Mama," and I stopped. Because here it was, the exact moment, the one my father had, and blue, and the one his father had before him. The moment where the easy thing and the true thing part company, and the easy thing is right there, and it's not even a lie, it's just quiet, and once, and without explanation, and it would work, and she'd wander off, and the door would close by about 1 millimeter, and nobody would ever know. So I sat down on the floor of my bedroom with my daughter in my lap, and I told a 2-year-old the entire truth. I said, "That's a letter your mother wrote me. She wrote it a long time ago, when she was very sad, and she was very brave, and I never got it, because somebody took it. And for 3 years I thought your mother didn't love me, and she thought I didn't love her, and we were both wrong, and we were both very lonely, and we lived in a big cold house, and we didn't say anything, and it nearly ruined everything. And then one night she read it to me out loud in a garden, and it was the bravest thing I ever saw anybody do, and that's why it's on the wall. It's on the wall so I remember to say things out loud, because if you don't say it, somebody can steal it, and you'll never even know it's gone." 2 years old. She understood approximately none of it. She said, "Why?" And I laughed until I could not breathe, and she laughed because I was laughing, and Vivienne came in to see what the noise was and found her husband sitting on the floor crying, laughing, with a toddler under a framed letter. But here's the thing. Here's the thing I want to leave you with. She's going to ask again. That's what 2-year-olds do. And she'll ask at 6, and she'll ask at 11, and one day she'll be 17 and she'll ask properly, and she will get the whole story, all of it, the mask and the maid and Serena and Brooke and the drawer with the divorce papers in it. And she is going to grow up in a small house with one kitchen where the letter hangs on the wall, and the answer to why is always, always given at full length, out loud, like a fool. She will never be a thorn the way I was a thorn. That's the win. Not the merger, not the fall of Serena Hayes, not even the ballroom. The win is that 110 years of cold men in a big house ends, permanently, on the floor of a bedroom, with a man too tired to be dignified, telling a 2-year-old the entire truth about a letter. My father said, "Don't be like me about it," once, quietly, dying. I'm not, Dad. It took me 35 years, and it cost me everything I had, and I got it back on the flip of a coin that landed on its edge. But I'm not. I'll tell you how it ends, and then I'll let you go. Last week I came home late. The house was dark, and I walked into the one kitchen, and my wife was sitting at the table that seats 6, at 11 at night, in the dark, with a cup of tea, not doing anything. And the old me, The man from the big house would have said, "Good evening," and gone upstairs and lain awake wondering what was wrong, and never asked for 30 years. So I sat down across from her, 4 feet, not 40, and I said, "What's wrong?" And she said, "Nothing's wrong. I was waiting for you." And that's it. That's the whole story. That's what 3 years of silence, a stolen letter, a ruined woman, a masquerade ball, and one silver mask bought me. A woman sitting in a kitchen at 11 at night, in the dark, waiting for me, and telling me so, out loud, because I asked. I do not have words for what that is worth. I have tried for 140,000 characters, and I don't. There isn't a number in any of my companies that means anything next to it. She looked at me across 4 feet of table, and her face did the thing that only I know how to read. The small thing at the corner. The thing that took me 3 weeks of midnights to learn, and that I would spend another 3 years of ice to learn again. And she said, "There you are." And I said, "I see you." And then she got up, and she came around the table, which is a journey of about 4 feet, and she stood behind my chair and put her arms around my neck the way she does, and she said into my hair, "You're late. Say the thing anyway." And so I said it, out loud, like a fool. The way I have said it every night for 4 years, and the way I will say it every night until one of us is in the ground, and then the other one will go and say it out loud in a graveyard in the rain, because that is what this family does now. I said, "I love you. I am frightened of how much. I nearly missed it by 11 days. And she said, "I know. Say it again tomorrow." That's the marriage. Not the ball, not the mask. That. 4 feet of table, a woman who won't let you be dignified, and a sentence that has to be said again tomorrow because it does not keep. The end.